Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The crackling of twigs under my boots was the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest. I had always loved to solo camping trips, but something about this one felt different. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the fading light. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to too many hours alone with my thoughts. That's when I saw him. Beautiful evening for a hike, isn't it? The man's voice startled me, seemingly materializing out of nowhere. He was tall and lean with a weathered face that spoke of years spent. Outdoors, his smile was friendly, but something in his eyes made my skin prickle. "Yeah, it is," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just looking for a good spot to set up camp for the night." "Well, you're in luck," he exclaimed, his enthusiasm a bit too forced. "I know the perfect clearing just up ahead. Why don't I show you?" Every instinct told me to politely decline and move on, but the sun was sinking fast and I was tired against my better judgment. I nodded and followed him down the narrow trail as we walked. He chatted amiably about the area, pointing out various plants and rock formations. His knowledge was impressive, and I found myself relaxing slightly. Maybe I had misjudged him, so what brings you out here all alone? He asked, glancing back at me with that unsettling smile. "We just needed to clear my head," I said, keeping my answer vague. "Sometimes the city gets too loud, you know." He nodded sagely. "Oh, I know exactly what you mean. That's why I never leave these woods. They have a way of keeping you." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine, but before I could dwell on it, we emerged into a small clearing. It was perfect for camping, with a flat area for my tent and a natural fire pit ringed with stones. "This is great. Thanks," I said, shrugging off my backpack. "I appreciate the help." "Oh, it's my pleasure," he replied, making no move to leave. "In fact, why don't I help you set up camp? It'll be dark soon, and 4 hands are better than 2. I hesitated, not wanting to offend him, but also not comfortable with the idea of him staying. "That's okay. I can manage. I'm sure you have your own camp to get back to." He waved his hand dismissively. "Nonsense. I'm in no rush. Besides, it's not safe for someone to be out here alone. You never know what kind of creatures might be lurking in the dark." The emphasis he placed on a creatures made my heart rate. "Spike?" I forced a smile and started unpacking my tent, hoping that if I got set up quickly, he'd leave as we worked. The stranger's behavior became increasingly odd. He'd ask personal questions, then change the subject abruptly. When I deflected, his eyes would dart to the woods surrounding us as if watching for something, and more than once I caught him staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The sun had fully set by the time we finished the clearing, now bathed in silvery moonlight. I stood back admiring my cozy setup when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jumped, spinning around to find the stranger mere inches from my face. "You've done well," he said, his voice low and growly, "but there's still so much to do before the night is through." I took a step back, my heart pounding. "Thanks for your help, but I think I'm good now. You should probably head back to your own camp before it gets too late." He tilted his head, reminding me unnervingly of a predator sizing up its prey. "Oh, but I'm exactly where I need to be. You see, these woods, they get hungry sometimes, and it's been so long since we've had a visitor." My blood ran cold as the implications of his words sank in. I glanced at my tent, calculating the odds of reaching my phone before he could stop me. As if reading my thoughts, he stepped between me and the tent. Now, let's not do anything rash. The night is young, and we have so much to discuss." I backed away slowly, my mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. "Look, I don't want any trouble. Why don't we just go our separate ways?" He laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the trees. "But trouble has already found you, my dear. The moment you stepped into these woods, you became part of them, and they don't let go easily." I turned to run, but he was faster than I expected. His hand clamped around my wrist, yanking me back with surprising strength. I stumbled, falling hard onto the forest floor. "Please," I gasped, struggling to free myself from his grip. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone about this." I swear his eyes glittered in the moonlight, a manic glee spreading across his face. "Oh, but that's not how this works. You see, the forest chose you, and now you'll never leave." As he spoke, I became aware of movement in the surrounding woods. Shadows seemed to shift and swirl, taking on vaguely human shapes. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to find a way out. My free hand groped the ground, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a hefty branch, and without hesitation, I swung it with all my might. The impact caught him off guard, and his grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring about direction or path, just needing to put distance between us branches. Whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush. The stranger's enraged howls echoing behind me. The forest seemed to come alive around me, trees creaking and groaning as if trying to block my escape. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Only then did I dare to slow down and take stock of my sewer surroundings. The clearing and my campsite were long gone, replaced by dense, unfamiliar woods. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, leaving me in near total darkness. Leaning against a tree, I tried to calm my ragged breathing and racing heart. I needed to think to come up with a plan, but the forest felt oppressive, closing in around me with malevolent intent. A twig snapped nearby and I froze, straining my ears. I could make out the faint sound of footsteps slowly and methodically searching the area. "I know you're out there," the stranger's voice called out eerily. Calm. "Now you can run all night if you like, but these woods, they always lead back to me in the end." I bit back a whimper, pressing myself against the rough bark of the tree. My mind raced through options, each one seeming more hopeless than the last. I had no idea which direction would lead me out of the forest, and my phone was still in my backpack back at the campsite. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the stranger's soft, unsettling humming. I held my breath, praying he would pass by without noticing me. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my scream. I thrashed wildly, but whoever held me was strong. "Shh," a voice hissed in my ear. "I'm trying to help you." I froze, confusion mixing with fear. It wasn't the stranger's voice, but that of a woman. Slowly, she removed her hand from my mouth. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Someone who knows what he is." She replied softly and how to stop him. "But we have to move quickly and quietly." "Can you do that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The woman took my hand and led me deeper into the woods. Moving with a surety that spoke of intimate familiarity with the terrain, we walked for what felt like hours. The woman occasionally pausing to listen or change direction. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, we emerged into another clearing. This one was different, though. Symbols were carved into the trees surrounding it, and in the center stood a large flat stone covered in strange markings. "What is this place?" I asked, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The woman's face was grim in the moonlight, the heart of the forest and the source of his power. She quickly explained how the stranger was bound to the forest, drawing strength from it to lure and trap unsuspecting hikers, but the bond worked both ways, and if we could sever it, we might have a chance to escape. As she spoke, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the trees. He had found our trail. "We're out of time," the woman said, her voice tight with urgency. "Whatever happens, don't let him touch the stone." The clearing erupted into chaos as the stranger burst through the tree line, his face contorted with rage. He lunged for the stone, but the woman intercepted him, grappling fiercely. I stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the surreal scene before me, but as the stranger began to overpower the woman, I knew I had to act. Spotting a sharp rock near my feet, I scooped it up and charged forward with all my strength. I brought it down on the strange symbols carved into the stone. The effect was immediate and terrifying. A deafening crack split the air, and the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. The stranger let out an inhuman shriek, his body contorting as if being torn apart from the inside. "Run," the woman shouted. Grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the trees, we ran blindly through the woods, the earth shaking violently beneath us. Trees groaned and toppled around us, and I was certain we would be crushed at any moment, just when I thought we couldn't go on. We burst out of the tree line onto a paved road. A car screeched to a halt in front of us. The driver's shocked face visible through the windshield as we climbed into the car. I looked back at the forest. A thick, unnatural mist was rising from the trees, obscuring everything from view. The last thing I saw before we drove away was a twisted, inhuman shape emerging from the mist, its agonized howl fading into the night. I never went camping alone again. After that night, the wilderness held a new terror for me. Now one that no amount of rationalization could erase. Sometimes in my dreams, I still hear the stranger's voice calling out to me, promising that one day, the forest will reclaim what it lost. And on those nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, grateful for the solid walls around me and the distance between myself and those dark, hungry woods. The streetlights flickered ominously as I pulled up to the curb, the app on my phone pinging to confirm my passenger's location. It was well past midnight, and the usually bustling streets of downtown were eerily empty. I had been driving for rideshare services for months now, but something about tonight felt off. I spotted my passenger immediately, a tall, lean man in a dark coat, his face partly obscured by the brim of a fedora as he approached the car. I forced a smile and unlocked the doors. Just another late-night fare, I told myself, nothing to worry about. "Evening," I said as he slid into the back seat, heading to Oakwood Avenue. "Right," he nodded silently, his eyes meeting mine in the rear-view mirror. There was something unsettling about his gaze, a coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. I pulled away from the curb, the silence in the car thick and oppressive. Usually I'd try to make small talk with passengers, but something told me to keep quiet. We'd been driving for about 5 minutes when he finally spoke. "You do this often, drive at night?" His voice was low and growly with an accent I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, a few nights a week," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. It helps pay the bills. He hummed thoughtfully, "Must meet all sorts of interesting people." I nodded my eyes, flicking to the rearview mirror. He was staring intently at the back of my head, and I quickly looked back at the road. "So what's your story?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "What brings a person like you to this line of work?" The way he said "person" made my skin crawl, like he was tasting the word and finding it lacking. "Oh, just trying to make ends meet," I said, aiming for a light tone. "The flexible hours work well with my schedule." "Your schedule?" he repeated slowly. "And what else does your schedule involve?" I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. This was veering into territory that felt dangerous. "Not much," I said. Forcing a laugh, "Work, sleep, repeat, the usual." He leaned back, but I could feel his eyes still on me. "The usual," he echoed. How ordinary the way he said it made it sound like an accusation. We drove in silence for a few more minutes, the streets growing darker and less familiar as we headed towards the outskirts of town. I realized with a jolt that we were in an area I didn't know well. The houses growing sparer and the roads narrower. "So," he said, suddenly making me jump, "tell me about your family." My blood ran cold. I hadn't mentioned anything about my family. I don't really have much family. I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "That's not what your profile says. In fact, it mentions a sister in Millbrook." Was it lovely little town? My heart was pounding. Now, how did he know that my rideshare profile didn't have any personal information like that? "I think you must be mistaking me for someone else," I said. My voice shaking slightly, he chuckled, a low, menacing sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Oh, I don't think so, Sarah." He said, "You using my name for the first time. I think I know exactly who you are." I felt panic rising in my chest. This wasn't right. None of this was right. "I think there's been some kind of mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Maybe we should end the ride here." "Keep driving," he said, his voice suddenly hard and cold. "We're not finished yet." I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him reaching into his coat. My heart leapt into my throat as I imagined what he might be pulling out in that moment. I made a split-second decision. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. The sudden stop threw him forward, and I used that moment of confusion to unbuckle my seat, bell and fling open the driver's door. I ran my feet pounding on the pavement. Not daring to look back, I could hear him shouting behind me. The car door slamming shut. The starry street was dark and unfamiliar, houses looming on either side with no lights on. I darted between two buildings, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear his footsteps behind me getting closer. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning. Suddenly, I stumbled, my foot catching on an uneven patch of ground. I went down hard, scraping my hands and knees on the rough pavement before I could get up. A hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me back. I screamed, kicking out wildly, but his grip was like iron. He flipped me over, looming over me in the darkness in the faint moonlight. I could see his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were wild, a manic grin spreading across his features now. Now he said, his voice mockingly gentle, "That wasn't very nice, darn Sarah. We were having such a lovely conversation." I struggled against his grip, but expression. "I know everything about you, Sarah, your hopes, your fears, your dirty little secrets." He leaned in closer, his breath hot on my face, and what I want is to play a game. My mind raced trying to figure out how to escape. I needed to keep him to talking by myself sometime. What kind of game? I asked, my voice trembling. He smiled, a predatory grin that made my blood run cold. "Oh, it's a simple game. I ask questions and you answer truthfully for every lie." He pulled something from his coat, a long, wicked-looking knife that glinted in the moonlight. "Well, let's just say the consequences are sharp." I swallowed hard. My eyes fixed on the knife, and if I refused to play, his grip on my arm tightened painfully. "That's not an option." "Sarah, the game has already begun." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to think to find a way out of this nightmare. "First question," he said, his voice taking on a sing-song. "Quality. Why did you really start driving at night?" I hesitated. My mind racing, the truth was embarrassing, but lying seemed far more dangerous. I was trying to avoid someone. I admitted an ex who wouldn't leave me alone. I thought working nights would make it harder for him to find me. He nodded, seeming pleased. "Very good. Sarah, honesty suits you. Next question, what's your biggest fear?" My heart pounded as I considered my answer. The truth was too revealing, too personal, but the knife gleamed menacingly in his hand, a clear warning against deception, being helpless. I whispered, hating how vulnerable the admission made me feel, not being in control of my own life. He smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made me shudder. "Interesting, and right now, how in control do you feel?" "Sarah," I bit back a sob, anger and fear wearing inside me. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" He ticked, wagging the knife in front of my face now. "Now that's not how the game works." I asked the questions. Remember. Suddenly, a bright light flooded the alley, momentarily blinding us. Both the sound of an engine revving filled the air, and my attacker's head snapped up. A car had turned into the alley, its high beams illuminating the scene. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, with a snarl of frustration, my attacker released me, scrambling to his feet. He took one last look at me, his eyes burning with a promise of future retribution. Before darting off into the shadows, the car screeched to a halt beside me, and a familiar face leaned out of the driver's window. It was another rideshare driver I knew, a kind older woman named Marge Sarah. "My God, are you all right?" she asked, her voice thick with concern. I nodded weakly, still shaking as I pulled myself to my feet. "Marge, how did you find me?" She helped me into the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the darkness wearily. "I got a notification about a canceled ride in this area. Something felt off, so I came to check." Thank goodness I did. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The man's last look haunted me, a clear message that our game was merely postponed, not ended. In the days that followed, I gave a statement to the police, changed my phone number time, and moved to a new apartment. I stopped driving at night, too afraid of who might get into my car, but even now, months later, I can't shake the fear. Every time I see a man in a dark coat or hear footsteps behind me at night, my heart races. I know he's out there somewhere waiting for our paths to cross again. And when they do, I fear the game will begin anew with stakes higher than I can imagine. The moment we pulled into the driveway of our new home, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. The house was beautiful, a charming Victorian with wraparound porch and gabled windows, but something about the way the neighbors' curtains twitched the sudden silence that fell over the previously bustling street made my stomach churn with unease. "Home sweet home," my husband Mark announced cheerfully as he cut the engine. Our kids Lily and Tom bounced excitedly in the back seat, eager to explore their new territory. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread as we unloaded the car. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few moments I'd catch glimpses of faces in windows, quickly disappearing when I turned to look directly. It was probably just curiosity about the new neighbors. I told myself nothing. Sinister about that, the first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, stopping by with casseroles and welcome baskets. But there was something off about their smiles, a tightness around their eyes that spoke of hidden tension. It started with small things. I'd come home to find our trash cans meticulously organized. Though I was certain I'd left them haphazardly by the curb, the garden beds, which I hadn't had time to tend, were suddenly weed-free and freshly mulched. At first I was grateful for the help, assuming it was just neighborly kindness. But as the days went on, the attention became unsettling. One afternoon I was in the kitchen when I noticed Mrs. Johnson from next door standing in our backyard, peering intently through our window when she saw me. She waved cheerily as if this was perfectly normal behavior. I waved back weakly, my hand shaking slightly as I closed the curtains that night at dinner. I broached the subject with Mark. "Don't you think the neighbors are a bit over-friendly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He laughed, spearing a piece of chicken with his fork. "Honey, after living in the city for so long, you're just not used to small-town hospitality. It's nice that people care, isn't it?" I nodded, not convinced, but not wanting to push the issue. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just paranoid. But as the weeks went by, the feeling of being constantly observed only intensified. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to see shadows moving across our lawn, hear whispered conversations just outside our windows that would abruptly stop when I approached. The children started to notice too. Lily came home from school one day, her face pale and drawn. "Mom," she whispered, "the other kids say we shouldn't be here. They say this house is cursed." I tried to reassure her, but her words sent a chill down my spine that night. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with questions. What had happened to the previous owners? Why had they left so suddenly, leaving behind furniture and personal belongings as if they'd fled in the middle of the night? Determined to get answers, I decided to do some digging the next day while Mark was at work and the kids at school. I headed to the local library. The librarian, a wizened old woman with thick glasses, eyed me suspicious. Lie as I asked about the history of our house. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, her voice quavering slightly. "Just curious," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "We're the new owners, and I thought it would be interesting to learn about its past." She stared at me for a long moment before sighing heavily. "Very well, but don't say I didn't warn you." She led me to a back room filled with dusty archives and old newspapers for hours. I pored over yellowed clippings and faded photographs. What I found made my blood run cold. Our house, it seemed, had a dark history over the past century. Family after family had moved in only to disappear mysteriously within a year. The articles were vague about the details, but there were whispers of cult activity, of sacrifices made to ensure the town's prosperity. As I read, pieces started falling into place. The over-attentive of the neighbors, their constant watching. They weren't being friendly. They were keeping tabs on us, waiting for something. I left the library in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd learned as I walked home. I noticed the stares of the town's people more acutely. Their smiles seemed more like grimaces, their eyes cold and calculating. I burst through the front door ready to tell Mark everything, only to find him sitting in the living room surrounded by neighbors. They all turned to look at me as I entered, their faces eerily blank. "Ah, there you are, honey," Mark said, his voice strangely flat. "We were just discussing the upcoming town festival. The neighbors think we should host it here." I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I don't think that's a good idea, I stammered, backing away slowly. Mrs. Johnson stood up, her movements stiff and unnatural. "Oh, but we insist," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's tradition. You see, the newest family always hosts." I looked at Mark silently, pleading for him to see the danger we were in, but his eyes were glazed over, a placid smile fixed on his face. "Where are the kids?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. They're playing at the park with the other children," Mr. Thompson from across the street said. "Don't worry, they're in good hands." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I knew then that I had to get us out of there and fast. I need to lie down," I said, faking a yawn. "Long day at the library. Why don't you all continue without me?" I hurried upstairs, my mind racing. I had to get the kids, had to convince Mark, had to get us all out of this town before it was too late. I threw some clothes and essentials into a bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. As I was about to leave the room, I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate footsteps that didn't belong to my husband or children. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on a heavy brass lamp on the bedside table. I unplugged it, gripping it tightly as I positioned myself behind the door. The footsteps stopped outside the room. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The door creaked open slowly. I raised the lamp, ready to strike Mom. Lily's voice made me freeze. I lowered the lamp, relief flooding through me as my daughter stepped into the room, but something was off. Her movements were too stiff, her eyes unfocused. "Honey, are you okay?" I asked, reaching out to her. She smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was too wide, too forced. "Everything's fine, Mom. The neighbors say it's time we need to go downstairs now." I backed away, my relief turning to horror. "Lily, sweetie, listen to me. We need to leave now." Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "But Mom, we can't leave. We're home now forever." I heard more footsteps. Saw shadows moving in the hallway. They were coming for us in that moment. Survival instinct took over. I grabbed the bag, pushed past Lily, and ran down the stairs, through the kitchen, out the back door. I could hear shouts behind me. Footsteps giving chase. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from the house, away from the town, away from the nightmare we'd unwittingly walked into. As I reached the town limits, I risked a glance back. What I saw made my blood run cold. The entire town was behind me, moving as one. Their faces blank and eyes empty. At the front were Mark and the kids reaching out to me, calling for me to come back. But I knew if I went back, I'd never leave again. With tears streaming down my face, I turned and kept running, the sound of their calls fading behind me. I don't know how long I ran or how I eventually found my way to a police station. 2 towns over, they didn't believe my story. Of course, how could they? It sounded insane, even to my own ears. But I know what I saw, I know what we escaped from, and I know that somewhere in that picturesque little town, my family is waiting. Waiting for me to come back, waiting to complete whatever dark ritual we had unknowingly become a part of. I'll find a way to save them. I have to, but for now, all I can do is warn others. Be careful where you make your home. Sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones hiding behind welcome back baskets and friendly smiles. The old farmhouse stood silent against the backdrop of rolling hills, its weathered facade a stark contrast to the sleek photos on the Airbnb listing. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy fog. This was supposed to be my writer's retreat, a chance to finish my novel in peace, but something about this place felt off. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to city dweller jitters, and grabbed my bags from the trunk. The key was exactly where the host said it would be, tucked under a flower pot by the front door, as I turned it in the lock. The door creaked open with an ominous groan that seemed to echo through the empty house. The interior was charming. In a rustic sort of way, all exposed ed beams and antique furniture, but there was a mustiness to the air, a feeling of neglect that no amount of artfully arranged throw pillows could disguise. I ran a finger along a nearby shelf, leaving a clear trail in the thin layer of dust. "Hello," I called out, more out of habit than expectation. The listing had promised complete privacy after all, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the silence. As if the very walls were absorbing the sound, I spent the rest of the afternoon settling in, unpacking my clothes, and setting up my laptop in the cozy study upstairs. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wooden floors, I decided to call it a day and get some rest. That's when I heard it. A soft thump, like something being set down, coming from somewhere below. I froze my heart. Suddenly racing, it was probably nothing. I told myself an old house settling maybe, or a branch hitting the roof. But then I heard it again and again, a rhythmic sound almost like footsteps. I crept to the top of the stairs, straining my ears. The sound had stopped, but now there was something else. A faint scratching like nails on wood coming from behind the walls. "Hello?" I called again. My voice shaky. "Is someone there?" Silence. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread I was being ridiculous. There was no one here but me. I was letting my writer's imagination run wild. That's all I went to bed that night with all the lights on, telling myself it was just so I could read before sleep. But every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside had me sitting bolt upright. My heart pounding the next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains, feeling foolish about my night terrors. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and settled into work, determined to make up for lost time. But as the day wore on, little things kept pulling me out of my writing flow. A door I could have sworn I'd left open was now closed. A book had fallen from a shelf when I wasn't looking, and always that feeling of being watched by a mid-afternoon. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was very wrong. I decided to do a thorough search of the house, if only to put my mind at ease. I started in the basement, a dank, cobweb-filled space that sent shivers down my spine as I swept my flashlight across the room. Something caught my eye. A section of the wall looked off. The bricks didn't quite match the rest. Heart pounding, I approached it up close. I could see that the moor was newer, not as weathered as the surrounding area. With trembling hands, I pressed against it. To my horror, it moved slightly. I stumbled back, my mind reeling what was behind that wall, and more importantly, who had sealed it up. I raced back upstairs, my thoughts a jumble of terror and curiosity. Should I call the police, the Airbnb host? But what would I say that I had a hunch there was something sinister hidden in the basement? As night fell, I paced the living room, debating my next move. That's when I heard it again, the footsteps. But this time they weren't coming from below, they were coming from the attic. My blood ran cold. I knew I should run, should get in my car and drive as far away from this place as possible. But something held me back. I need to know to understand what was happening in this house. With shaking hands, I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the mantel and made my way to the attic stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, announcing my presence to whatever waited above the attic. It was pitch black, the beam of my flashlight barely penetrating the gloom dust. Moe's danced in the light, stirred up by my presence and by something else there in the far corner. Something moved, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness, shifting and writhing. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The shadow stilled. Then slowly it began to take shape. A figure, hunched and twisted, turned to face me. I caught a glimpse of pale, sunken eyes, of skin stretched tight over bone. I screamed, stumbling backward. My foot caught on something, sending me crashing to the floor. The candlestick clattered away. Rolling into the shadows, the figure moved towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I scrambled backwards, my hand closing around something cold and metal. The flashlight, I swung it up the beam, catching the figure full in the face. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a person. Not anymore. Its face was a grotesque mask of decay. Skin mottled and peeling, but its eyes were alive, filled with a hunger that turned my insides to ice. "You shouldn't be here." It rasped, its voice like sandpaper on stone. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. The creature took another step forward, its joints cracking with each movement. "This is our home," it hissed. "You're not welcome here." Our home? The words echoed in my mind, and suddenly, horribly, I understood the walled-up section in the basement, the constant feeling of being watched. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't alone. As if in response to my realization, I heard more movement from the shadows from behind the boxes and old furniture. More figures emerged, each as twisted and decayed. As the first, I found my voice, then a scream tearing from my throat as I scrambled to my feet. I ran blind with terror, stumbling down the attic stairs and through the house behind me. I could hear them, the shuffle of feet, the rasp of labored breathing they were following, hunting me through the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary. I reached the front door, yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Locked when had it locked. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy with fear. They were getting closer. I could feel their cold breath on the back of my neck, hear their nails scraping against the walls. Finally, mercifully, the lock gave way. I burst out into the cool night air, not daring to look back as I ran to my car. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the driveway gravel, spraying behind me in my rearview mirror. I caught one last glimpse of the farmhouse figures stood in every window, their pale faces watching as I fled. I drove through the night, not stopping until the sun began to rise. Only then, in the harsh light of day, did I allow myself to think about what had happened. I never went back to that farmhouse. I left a vague review on Airbnb, warning others about strange noises and unsettling atmosphere, but how could I explain the truth sometimes? Late at night, I still hear those footsteps, still feel those eyes watching me from the shadows, and I wonder with a chill that goes bone deep if maybe I didn't escape after all. If maybe somehow I brought a piece of that house's horror home with me. Because in those moments between sleep and waking, when the world is at its quietest, I swear I can hear a voice rasping, hungry, and all too familiar. "You're not welcome here." The first thing I noticed when the lights went out was the silence. One moment, the hum of the refrigerator and the software of my laptop. Fan filled the air, the next, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing, suddenly loud in the darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the screen's glow momentarily. Blinding me, 9:47 p.m. No signal, great. "It's fine," I muttered to myself, trying to quell the unease growing in my chest. Just a power outage happens all the time, but as I moved through my apartment using my phone's flashlight to navigate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The darkness outside seemed thicker than usual, as if the entire world had been swallowed by an inky void. I tried the landline, but it was dead too. No dial tone, not even a crackle of static, just silence. That's when I heard it, a soft scratching at the front door, so faint I almost missed it. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It could be anything, I told myself. A tree branch, a stray cat. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The scratching came again. Louder this time, more insistent than a thud, as if someone or something had thrown their weight against the door. My heart was pounding now. Blood rushing in my ears, I backed away. Slowly, my eyes fixed on the door. The thewing continued, growing more forceful with each impact. I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. No signal, no way to call for help. The assault on the front door stopped abruptly for a moment. Silence reigned again, then footsteps slow, deliberate, moving through my living room. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a whimper. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. But the cold sweat on my skin, the trembling in my limbs, it all felt too real. The footsteps drew closer, pausing outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, praying that whoever, whatever was out there would move on. A soft chuckle broke the silence, sending chills down my spine. "I know you're in there," a voice called out, low and raspy. "Why don't you come out and play?" I backed away from the door, my mind racing the window. It was my only chance. I moved towards it, trying to be as quiet as possible. The doorknob rattled now. Now the voice cred. "Don't be rude, I've come all this way to see you." My fingers fumbled with the window light match. It was old, stiff from disuse. I pushed harder, panic giving me strength. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. Once, twice, the window finally gave way, sliding up with a groan that seemed deafening in the quiet apartment. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something rotten. I was halfway out the window when the bedroom door splintered in the dim light from my discarded phone. I caught a glimpse of my intruder, tall, unnaturally thin, with eyes that glowed like embers in the darkness. I didn't wait to see more. I scrambled out onto the fire escape, the metal grating. Cold against my bare feet, I could hear it moving behind me. Its breathing harsh and excited. I ran down the stairs, the old structure creaking and swaying beneath me. My foot slipped on a wet step and I nearly fell. A hand grabbed at my shirt finger like ice grazing my back. Panic gave me wings. I flew down the remaining stairs, jumping the last few feet to the alley below the impact. Jarred my bones, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran blindly through the dark streets. The sound of pursuit close behind the entire city seemed deserted. Every window dark, every door closed. Where was everyone? A car. I needed to find a car. My keys were in my pocket. I always kept them there, a habit. Born from late nights at the office. If I could just find my car, I could escape. I turned a corner and there it was. My beat-up old sedan, a beacon of hope. In the darkness, I fumbled with the keys, acutely aware of the footsteps drawing nearer. The key slid home and I wrenched the door open, throwing myself inside. I jammed the key into the ignition, turning it with desperate force. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed the car into drive just as a shape loomed in my rearview mirror. I floored it, tires squealing on the wet pavement in the mirror. I saw it standing in the middle of the road, watching me flee. Even from a distance, I could see its mouth stretched in an impossible grin. I drove for hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every shadow on the road made me flinch. Every rustle of wind sounded like whispered threats as the first light of dawn broke the horizon. I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. I had escaped, I was safe. But then my car radio crackled to life, startling me so badly I nearly swerved off the road through the static. A familiar voice spoke low, raspy, amused. "Did you really think you could run from me?" I screamed, slamming on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop in the middle of the empty house. Highway silence fell once more. The radio was dead. The voice gone, but as I sat there shaking and sobbing, I knew the truth. The darkness had followed me, and it always would. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been a terrible nightmare. I went back to my apartment, cleaned up the broken door, and tried to resume my normal life. But things were different now. The lights never seemed quite bright enough. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, and always there was that feeling of being watched. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't help. In the quiet hours of the night, I would hear it soft scratching at my door, whispered promises of games yet to be played. I moved apartments, then cities, but it didn't matter where. Wherever I went, the darkness followed in crowded streets. I would catch glimpses of a too-tall figure with glowing eyes in busy cafes. I would hear that raspy chuckle just behind me. Friends and family started to worry. They said I looked tired, paranoid. They suggested therapy medication, but how could I explain? How could I make them understand the terror that stalked me day and night? Months passed. I lost my job. My relationships crumbled. I became a shell of my former self, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the moment when the lights would go out and it would come for me again. And then one night it happened. I was huddled in my new apartment, every light blazing when the power cut out. In the sudden darkness, I heard that familiar chuckle ready to play. The voice asked closer than it had ever been before. I didn't run this time. I was tired of running, tired of being afraid. Instead, I stood up facing the darkness that had haunted me for so long. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. The darkness seemed to coalesce, taking on that familiar tall, thin shape. Its eyes glowed, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Want it repeated," sounding almost surprised. "My dear, I don't want anything from you. I am you, the part of you that you've always tried to ignore, the darkness you've always feared as it spoke." I felt a chill of recognition. The voice, it was mine, distorted and twisted, but undeniably mine. "No," I whispered, but even as I denied it, I knew it was true. The long nights of self-doubt, the fears I'd pushed down the parts of myself I'd tried to hide, they had taken on a life of their own. The figure stepped closer, its form blurring at the edges, merging with the shadows around us. "Embrace me," it said, reaching out with hands that were both familiar and alien. "Stop running, accept who you truly are." I stood there trembling as the darkness closed in around me for a moment. I considered giving in, letting it consume me, but then I remembered the fear, the helplessness I'd felt that first night, the months of terror that followed, and I made a choice. "No." I said again, this time with conviction, "You're not me, you're what I was afraid I might become, but I choose differently." I reached out, not in fear, but with determination, and flicked on the light switch. The room flooded with light. Harsh and sudden, the figure before me wavered its form, dissipating like smoke in the wind. But before it vanished completely, I saw something in its glowing eyes. Not anger or frustration, but relief. As the last wisps of darkness faded away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the oppressive feeling of being watched, the constant dread it was gone. I stood there in my brightly lit apartment, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in months the darkness was still there. Of course it always would be, but now I understood it wasn't something to be feared or fought. It was a part of me to be acknowledged and accepted from that night on. I slept with the lights off, and when I heard that familiar scratching, that raspy chuckle in the dark, I didn't run, I didn't hide, I simply said, "I see you, I accept you, but you don't control me." And in the silence that followed, I found peace. The rhythmic thumping of our failing engine was the first sign that our road trip was about to take a sinister turn, as our car sputtered and coughed its way to a stop on that desolate stretch of rural A.R. Aransas highway. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just become characters in one of those horror stories my sister Jenny loved to read. "Well, this is just perfect," I muttered futilely, turning the key in the ignition. "One last time. Jenny Ever." The optimist patted my arm. "Don't worry, Mike, we'll figure something out, we always do." I wished I shared her confidence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in ominous shades of red and purple in the gathering darkness. The surrounding cornfields seemed to whisper secrets to each other, their rustling leaves a conspiratorial murmur. We had passed a farmhouse a few miles back. It was our best shot at finding help, or at least a phone to call for a tow with no cell service and limited options. We locked up the car and started walking. The air grew colder as we trudged along the empty road, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Jenny huddled closer to me, her earlier optimism fading with each step. "Mike," she whispered, "do you ever get the feeling that we're being watched?" I was about to dismiss her fears when I saw it too. A flicker of movement in the cornfield to our right. I squinted into the darkness, but whatever it was had vanished. "It's probably just an animal," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "Come on, we're almost there." The farmhouse loomed ahead, a decrepit Victorian silhouette against the darkening sky as we approached. I could see that it had seen better days, paint peeled from the weathered siding and several windows were boarded up. I hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, a sense of unease creeping up my spine, but we had come too far to turn back. Now I raised my hand to knock on the door, but before my knuckles could make contact, it creaked open, An elderly couple stood in the doorway, their faces etched with deep wrinkles and wary expressions. The woman's eyes darted between Jenny and me, while the man's gaze remained fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Can we help you?" the woman asked, her voice thin and wee. I explained our situation, trying to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Something about their blank stares and two wide smiles set my nerves on edge. Of course. The old man said, his voice surprisingly deep and resonant. "You poor dears must be exhausted. Come in, we have a phone you can use." Jenny shot me a relieved smile as we stepped over the threshold. The interior of the house was as dated as its exterior, with faded floral wallpaper and furniture that looked like it hadn't been moved in decades. The old woman introduced herself as Martha and her husband as Jeb. They led us to a dusty parlor where an ancient rotary phone sat on a side table. "I'm afraid the phone lines have been acting up lately," Jeb said apologetically. "But you're welcome to try in the meantime. Why don't you join us for supper? It's almost ready." I opened my mouth to decline, but Jenny spoke first. "That would be lovely." "Thank you," as Martha shuffled off to the kitchen. Jeb settled into a worn armchair, his roomy eyes fixed on us with an unsettling intensity. So he said, leaning forward slightly, "What brings you young folks to these parts?" We explained about our road trip, how we were heading to visit family in Little Rock. As we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room felt too still, the air too thick, and Jeb's gaze never wavered even when Martha called him to help in the kitchen. Left alone, Jenny and I exchanged glance. "Maybe we should just try the phone and go," I whispered. She nodded, looking relieved, but when I picked up the receiver, there was no dial tone, just dead silence. Before I could tell Jenny Martha called us to dinner, the dining room was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting long shadows across the walls. The table was set with mismatched china and tarnished silverware. As we took our seats, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden chair backs. They looked ancient, almost runic. A shiver ran down my spine. Martha set a large oak-covered dish in the center of the table. "I hope you're hungry," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It's a family recipe. When she lifted the lid, the smell hit me first. It was rich and meaty, but with an underlying odor that turned my stomach. The stew inside was dark, almost black, with unidentifiable chunks floating in the murky liquid. Jenny ped beside me. "It looks interesting." She managed always the polite one. Jeb and Martha watched us intently as they ladled the stew into our bowls. I lifted a spoonful, trying not to gag at the smell. Just as I was about to force myself to take a bite, a loud thump from upstairs made us all freeze. Martha's hand shook spilling stew onto the tablecloth. "Just the house settling," Jeb said quickly, but his eyes darted nervously to the ceiling. Another thump followed by the distinct sound of footsteps. Jenny grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What was that?" I demanded, rising from my chair. Jeb stood as well, his friendly demeanor evaporating. "Sit down, boy," he growled. "Eat your supper." The footsteps grew louder. Descending the stairs, Martha began to mutter under her breath, rocking back and forth in her chair. Suddenly, the dining room door burst open. In the doorway stood a figure that made my blood run cold. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was pale and mottled, stretched tight over protruding bones. But its face was the stuff of nightmares, empty eye sockets. Saint stared at us, and its mouth was a gaping maw lined with jagged teeth. Jenny screamed. I grabbed her hand, and we bolted for the door, knocking over chairs in our haste behind us. I could hear Jeb shouting and Martha's high-pitched wailing. We burst out of the house and into the night, running blindly down the dirt driveway. The cornfields on either side seemed to press in on us, the stalks reaching out like grasping fingers. I chanced to look back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was following us, moving with an unnatural loping gait, and behind it I could see Jeb and Martha, their faces contorted with a mixture of fear and hunger. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. Finally, mercifully, we saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically and the pickup truck screeched to a halt beside us. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, took one look at our terrified expressions and threw open the passenger door. "Get in," he barked. Now we didn't need to be told twice as we peeled away. I looked in the side mirror. The farmhouse was receding in the distance, but I could still see figures standing in the road watching us go. The driver, who introduced himself as Tom, listened in stunned silence as we recounted our experience when we finished. He shook his head grimly. "You're not the first to have a run-in with the Hendersons." He said that farmhouse has been abandoned for years, but sometimes folks passing through say they've seen lights on, heard voices, those who stop. "Well, they don't always come back," we rode in shocked silence for a while, the enormity of what we'd escaped slowly sinking in. Finally, Tom spoke again. "LED has it that the Hendersons made a deal with something evil long ago, promised it would keep them alive forever as long as they provided it with sustenance." I shuddered, remembering the strange stew, the horrible creature in the doorway. Jenny clutched my hand, her face pale in the dashboard light. Tom dropped us off at a motel in the next town, refusing any payment for the ride. As he drove away, he left us with a warning. "Be careful out there. Some roads aren't meant to be traveled, and some houses should be left alone." We never did finish that road trip the next day. We called a tow truck for our car and booked the first flight home. But the memory of that night haunts me. Still sometimes when I'm driving down a dark, lonely road, I can't help but glance in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a decrepit farmhouse materialize in the distance. Its windows glowing with an inviting light, and in my nightmares I still hear Martha's sing-song voice calling us to dinner, smell that sickly sweet stew, and see those empty, hungry eyes staring at me from the shadows. The security cameras blinked out one by one, each screen fading to stat before going dark. I leaned closer to the monitors, my coffee forgotten in my hand as an icy chill crept up my spine. In my 3 years as a night guard at Oak Ridge office complex, I'd never seen anything like this. "What the hell?" I muttered. Tapping frantically at the keyboard, nothing responded. The entire system seemed to be dead. I reached for the phone to call my supervisor, but the line was dead. My cell phone showed no signal. It was as if the entire building had been cut off from the outside world. That's when I heard it. A soft thud followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The building was supposed to be empty. I was the only one here tasked with watching over 20 floors of darkened offices and conference rooms. The footsteps grew louder, more purposeful. They weren't coming from the lobby or the elevators, but from deeper within the building. Impossible. I had locked everything down myself. At the start of my shift, I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. Protocol dictated that I should investigate any unusual activity, but every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the building as fast as I could. "Hello!" I called out, my voice embarrassingly weak. "This is security? Identify yourself." Silence, then a low chuckle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the security office, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The hallway stretched before me, a dark tunnel punctuated by the dim glow of emergency exit signs. As I moved down the corridor, I became acutely aware of how loud my footsteps were, how heavily I was breathing. I swept my flashlight back and forth, its beam cutting through the darkness. Like a knife. The air felt different somehow. Heavier, charged with a strange electricity that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I reached the elevator bank and hesitated. The smart thing would be to leave to call for backup. But curiosity and a sense of duty pushed me forward. I pressed the call button more out of habit than expectation. To my surprise, the elevator dinged its doors, sliding open with a soft whoosh. I stepped inside, my finger hovering over the floor buttons where had the sound come from. I tried to recall, to pinpoint its origin, the 10th floor. I decided that's where I'd start the ride. Up was agonizingly slow, each floor ticking by with excruciating deliberation. When the doors finally opened, I half expected to see someone or something waiting for me, but the 10th floor was as dark and silent as the lobby had been. I stepped out my flashlight beam, dancing across empty cubicles and closed office doors. Everything looked normal, undisturbed. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, maybe a door slammed somewhere to my left, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is your last warning. I identify yourself or I'm calling the police." Another chuckle closer this time, then a voice low and raspy. "Oh, I don't think you'll be calling anyone, friend." I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness for a split second. I caught a glimpse of a figure at the end of the hall, tall, unnaturally thin, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Then it was gone, ducking into one of the offices. My mind raced. This wasn't a typical intruder. Something was very, very wrong here. I should leave, I thought, get out, call for help. But what if this thing got away? What if it hurt someone else against my better judgment? I moved down the hallway, my free hand reaching for the pepper spray on my belt. I approached the office where I'd seen the figure disappear, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the entire floor. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door. The office was dark, seemingly empty. I swept my flashlight around, illuminating a desk, some filing cabinets. The beam caught something reflective, too. Something's eyes. I stumbled backward, fumbling with the pepper spray, but before I could raise it, a hand shot out of the darkness, knocking it from my grasp. The flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning crazily around the room in the strobing light. I caught glimpses of my attacker, pale skin stretched tight over an elongated face, a mouth full of teeth that were far too sharp to be human, and those eyes glowing with an inner light that spoke of something ancient and malevolent. I turned to run, but it was faster, impossibly fast. Its hand closed around my arm, its grip like now it said its voice, a rasping whisper. "Don't you want to play?" I struggled, panic giving me strength. I didn't know I had. I managed to wrench free. Bolting out of the office and down the hallway behind me, I could hear it laughing. The sound echoing off the walls, I ran for the stairs, not trusting the elevator as I burst through the stairwell door. I heard it again. "Closer now, you can run it." Called out, but you can't hide. This is my playground now. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. I emerged on another floor, the 15th thrower according to the sign, and ran down the hallway looking for somewhere to hide. Most of the offices were locked, but I finally found one that opened. I ducked inside, closing the door as quietly as I could in the darkness. I fumbled for a hiding spot, eventually crawling under a large desk for what felt like hours. I sat there trying to control my breathing, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway outside. They paused outside the office door, and I held my breath, praying it would move on. The doorknob turned. I closed my eyes as if not seeing the danger could somehow make it go away. "I can smell your fear," the voice said, closer now. "It's intoxicating." I opened my eyes to see a pair of legs standing in front of the desk. Slowly, painfully slowly, it crouched down, its face coming into view in that moment, looking into its inhuman eyes. I understood true terror. This wasn't just an intruder or some psychopath. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in our world. It smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Found you," it said. "What happened next is a blur." I remember screaming, lashing out with all my strength. I remember running again through hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. I remember the thing always behind me, always just a step away, laughing at my futile attempts to escape. Somehow I made it to the lobby. The front doors were locked. When had they been locked? But in my desperation, I grabbed a chair and smashed through the glass. I ran into the night, not stopping until I collapsed on a busy street corner. Several blocks away, people gathered around me, concerned faces asking if I was okay. I couldn't speak, couldn't explain what had happened. The police came then, paramedics. They took me to the hospital, treating me for cuts and bruises I didn't even remember getting. I told them my story, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They thought I was crazy or on drugs or both. The next day, detectives came to take my statement. They told me they'd searched the building but found nothing out of the ordinary. The security cameras showed no intruder, just me running through the halls in a panic fighting against something that wasn't there. I quit my job that day. I couldn't face going back to that building, couldn't risk encountering that thing again for weeks afterward. I jumped at every shadow, flinched at every unexpected sound. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory of those glowing eyes, that inhuman smile, sometimes late at night. I swear I can hear that rasping chuckle as if it's right outside my window. I don't work night shifts anymore. I avoid tall buildings and empty offices, but no matter where I go, no matter what I do, I can't escape the feeling that someday, somehow it will find me again, and next time I might not be so lucky. The map crumpled in my shaking hands as I squinted at it in the fading light. This wasn't right. The trail should have looped back to the campsite hours ago. Instead, I found myself in a dense part of the forest I didn't recognize, with shadows growing longer and the air taking on an ominous chill. I've always prided myself on my sense of direction, but as the reality of my situation sank in, pride gave way to a gnawing fear I was lost, completely and utterly lost, in a wilderness that seemed to grow more menacing with each passing minute. Keep it together. Alex, I muttered to myself, trying to quell the panic rising in my chest. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and damp earth. Think logically, retrace your steps. Find higher ground, but as I turned to head back the way I came, I realized with a jolt that I couldn't remember which direction that was. The trees all looked the same, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the dimming light. That's when I heard it, a twig snapping, followed by the rustle of leaves. My heart leapt into my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then another snap closer. This time every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay still. It was probably just an animal. I reasoned a deer maybe, or a raccoon, nothing to be afraid of, but as the sounds drew nearer, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was too big to be any woodland creature I was familiar with, and it was moving with purpose towards me. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the deepening shadows. That's when I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance, warm and investing, like a cabin window illuminated against the darkness. Relief flooded through me. Civilization safety without a second thought. I began moving towards the light, my pace quickening with each step. As I drew closer, I could make out the silhouette of a small cabin. It looked old, weathered by years of harsh winters and scorching summers. But in that moment, it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. I approached the door, my hand raised to knock, when a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. There at the edge of the clearing stood a man. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent in the wilderness. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. Pale and intense, they seemed to glow in the twilight. "You look lost," he said, his voice growly and low. I nodded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I was hiking and I got turned around." Somehow he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, you're in luck. I was just about to have dinner. Why don't you come in and warm up?" Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. Stranger in the Woods' isolated cabin, it was the setup for a dozen gruesome endings. But as another cold wind whipped through the clearing, I realized I didn't have much choice. It was this or spend the night lost in the increasingly hostile forest. "Thank you," I said. Following him inside, the cabin was small but cozy, lit by the warm glow of oil lamps. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The man who introduced himself as JN bustled about, ladling some kind of stew into wooden bowls. "Eat," he said, handing me a bowl. "You must be famished." I realized in my panic I hadn't noticed the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. I took a cautious sip of the stew. It was rich and hearty, with a taste I couldn't quite place as I ate. John peppered me with questions. Where was I from what brought me to these woods? Did anyone know where I was? With each answer, I felt a growing unease. His interest seemed too keen, his gaze too intent, but I brushed it off as paranoia. He was just being hospitable, I told myself. Just a kind stranger helping a lost hiker after dinner. John offered me a bed for the night. The woods aren't safe after dark. He said, that odd smile playing on his lips again. All sorts of creatures come out at night. I didn't like the way he said creatures, but the alternative of stumbling around in the pitch-black forest was even less appealing. I accepted his offer with as much gratitude as I could muster. The bedroom was small, with a narrow bed pushed against one wall as JN showed me in. I noticed scratch marks on the inside of the door, deep gouges in the wood, as if something had tried desperately to get out what happened to the door. I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jay's expression darkened for a moment before that unsettling smile returned. "Raccoons," he said. "Crafty little beasts, always trying to get in where they don't belong." I nodded, not believing him for a second, but what choice did I have? I was miles from anywhere in a stranger's cabin with night falling fast asleep. "Well," John said as he left, closing the door behind him. I heard the distinct click of a lock turning. My heart began to race. I was trapped. I rushed to the window, but it was nailed shut. The scratches on the door suddenly took on a new horrifying meaning. They weren't from something trying to get in. They were from someone trying to get out. I spent the night huddled in a corner, clutching my backpack like a shield. Every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind outside sent my imagination into overdrive. What was gone? Planning. Why had he locked me in? As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I heard footsteps approaching. The lock turned and the door swung open. John stood there, that eerie smile still plastered on his face. "Sleep well?" he asked, as if locking guests in their rooms was perfectly normal behavior. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I had to get out of here, but I needed to play along until I could find an opportunity to escape. "Escape breakfast is ready," John said, gesturing for me to follow him as we ate. I tried to steer the conversation towards my departure. "I really appreciate your hospitality," I said, forcing a smile. "But I should probably get going. My friends will be worried about me." John's smile faltered for a moment. "Friends? I thought you said you were alone." I realized my mistake too late. "I mean, the people at the campsite, they'll notice. I'm missing." JN leaned forward, his pale eyes boring into mine now. Now he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "There's no need to lie. We both know no one's looking for you." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need to leave now." John stood as well, blocking my path to the door. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that." He said, "You see, it gets awfully lonely out here, and it's not often I have guests." The way he said guests made my blood run cold. I realized with horrifying clarity that I wasn't the first person to stumble upon this cabin, and if I didn't act fast, I wouldn't be the last. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed my bowl and hurled its contents at John's face. He yelled in pain and surprise. Momentarily blinded by the hot stew, I took my chance and ran. I burst out of the cabin, my lungs burning as I gulped in the cool morning air behind me. I could hear John shouting his heavy footsteps, giving chase. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging scratches. But I didn't slow down. I could hear John behind me getting closer just when I thought my legs would give out. I broke through the tree line. There in the distance, I saw a road civilization's safety with a final burst of energy. I sprinted towards it. A car appeared on the horizon, and I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. The car slowed, then stopped. An older couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. I didn't wait for them to speak, just yanked open the back door and threw myself inside. "Drive," I yelled. "Please, just drive." As we sped away, I dared to look back. There at the edge of the forest, I saw John. He stood perfectly still, watching the car disappear. Even from a distance, I could see that terrifying smile, and never went hiking alone again. After that, the police searched the area but found no trace of the cabin or John sometimes late at night. I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear his growly voice calling out to me from the darkness, and on those nights I lie awake until dawn, grateful for locked doors and the safety of civilization, knowing that somewhere out there in the deep dark woods, JN is still waiting for his next guest. The package sat on my doorstep, innocuous and brown, addressed to someone I'd never heard of. Sarah Mitchell, the name meant nothing to me, but the return address sent a chill down my spine. 1313. Ravens Court, my apartment number, but not my street. I stood there, key in hand, staring at the parcel as if it might suddenly spring to life. I should have left it there, should have called the post office. Explained the mix-up, but curiosity, that damned human trait, got the better of me. I picked up the package, unsurprisingly heavy for its size, and brought it inside. My apartment felt different somehow, as if the very air had changed with the introduction of this mysterious box. I set it on the kitchen counter, eyeing it wearily as I went about my evening routine, but my gaze days kept drifting back to it. Questions swirling in my mind. Who was Sarah Mitchell? Why did the return address match my apartment number, and what was inside? It was past midnight when I finally gave in. Temptation, I told myself I was just checking for a phone number, some way to contact the real recipient, but deep down I knew I was lying to myself. The tape gave way easily under my knife. I peeled back the brown paper, revealing a plain cardboard box beneath. My heart was pounding. As I lifted the lid, inside, nestled in crumpled newspaper, was a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Alongside it was a folded piece of paper with trembling hands. I opened it. "Sarah, the time has come. You know what must be done. R." The cryptic message sent a shiver down my spine. I turned my attention to the wooden box, my fingers tracing the strange symbols. It was locked, a tiny keyhole barely visible among the carvings. That's when I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from inside the box. I dropped it like it was on fire. Stumbling back from the counter, the scratching continued, growing more insistent. Whatever was inside wanted out. Panic seized me. I grabbed the box, intending to throw it out the window to rid myself of this nightmare, but as my fingers closed around it, a jolt of electricity shot through my body. Images flashed before my eyes. A dark room, candles flickering, hooded figures chanting in a language I didn't understand. I came to on the floor, the box clutched to my chest. The scratching had stopped, but I could feel a faint pulse, like a tiny heartbeat, emanating from within. My phone rang, making me jump. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail too, shaken to speak. A moment later, a message notification pinged. "We know you have it. Open the box, complete the ritual, or suffer the consequences." My blood ran cold. How did they know who were they, and what ritual? I spent the next few days in a state of paranoid frenzy. I didn't leave my apartment, didn't answer my phone. The box sat on my coffee table, a constant reminder of the madness that had invaded my life sometimes. Late at night, I'd hear the scratching again. Soft and insistent. On the third day, there was a knock at my door. I froze, hardly daring to breathe through the peephole. I saw a man in a delivery uniform holding another package delivery for Sarah Mitchell. He called out. My heart raced. I didn't answer. Praying he'd go away, after a few moments I heard him sigh and set the package down. His footsteps receded down the hallway. I waited an hour before cracking open the door. The package was there, identical to the first. This time I didn't hesitate. I tore it open. Right there. In the hallway inside was a key, small, ornate, and unmistakably designed for the wooden box. Along with it was another note: "Time is running out. Open the box, speak the words, or we'll come for you." I slammed the door shut, leaning against it as I tried to calm my ragged breathing. This was insanity. I should go to the police and tell them everything. But who would believe me? And what if these people, whoever they were, made good on their threats that night? I sat on my couch, the box in front of me, the key in my hand. The scratching had started again, more frantic than ever. I could feel the pulse of the body lock quickening. Matching the rapid beat of my own heart with shaking hands, I inserted the key. It turned smoothly, the lock clicking open with a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet apartment. I hesitated, my hand on the lid. Did I really want to see what was inside? Did I have a choice? I opened the box. A blinding light erupted from within, filling the room with an otherworldly glow. I shielded my eyes, feeling a rush of wind that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. When I lowered my arm, I gasped. Hovering above the open box was a small pulsating orb of energy. It thrummed with power, sending waves of heat and cold, washing over me in alternating bursts, and somehow impossibly I could hear it whispering. Speak the words, it hissed in a voice that was 1,000 voices. Complete the ritual. Fulfill your destiny. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp in my haste to get away. The orb followed. Growing larger, its whispers becoming a deafening chorus. Speak the words, but I didn't know the words. I wasn't. Sarah Mitchell. This wasn't meant for me. The orb pulsed angrily, tendrils of energy lashing out, scorching the walls and furniture. The temperature in the room skyrocketed. Sweat pouring down my face as I cowered in the corner. You are the chosen. The voices screamed. You must complete the ritual. In that moment of terror and confusion, a memory surfaced, the vision I'd had when I first touched the box. The hooded figures, the chanting without thinking. I began to repeat the words I'd heard, a language I didn't understand pouring from my lips. The orb flared brightly, expanding to fill the room. I felt myself being lifted off the ground, suspended in the pulsing energy. The chant grew louder, my voice joining with the thousands of others, and then suddenly silence. I found myself standing in the middle of my destroyed living room, the box lying open and empty at my feet. The orb was gone, but I could feel its energy thrumming through my veins. I knew with a certainty that terrified me that I had changed, that the world had changed. A knock at the door made me jump. I approached cautiously. Peering through the peephole, a group of people stood in the hallway dressed in dark robes. The one in front smiled, and I recognized him as the delivery man from earlier. Well done, Sarah, he said, though the door was still closed, or should I say vessel of the ancients, it's time to fulfill your true purpose. I stood there frozen as the reality of my situation sank in. I wasn't Sarah Mitchell. I had never been Sarah Mitchell, but I had opened the box. I had spoken the words, and now for better or worse, I had become her as I opened the door to face my new destiny. One thought echoed in my mind: never ever open a package that isn't addressed to you. You never know what kind of Pandora's box you might be unleashing. The robed figures entered my apartment, their faces a mix of reverence and anticipation. The leader approached me, holding out a hand. Come, he said, there's much to be done. I took his hand, feeling the last vestiges of my old life slip away. Whatever lay ahead, whatever cosmic game I had unwittingly become a part of, there was no going back. Now the package had been delivered, the ritual completed, and I, the accidental chosen one, was about to step into a world I never knew existed. As we left my apartment, my old life behind, I couldn't help but wonder how many other Sarah Mitchells were out there receiving packages not meant for them, unleashing forces they couldn't comprehend, and how many of them, like me, would be forever changed by a simple act of misplaced curiosity. The door closed behind us with a final ominous click. My journey as the vessel of the ancients had begun, all because of a package that should never have been mine. The welcome to Millbrook sign flashed by in an instant, faded paint peeling off weathered wood. I blinked, certain I had imagined it. We'd been driving for hours on this deserted highway, and this was the first sign of civilization we'd seen. Did you see that? I asked, turning to my friends in the back seat. Jake, his nose buried in his phone, grunted, non-committed Sarah. Our designated navigator frowned at the map spread across her lap. Millbrook. That's not on here, she muttered, tracing our route with her finger. I slowed the car, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the empty road. Maybe we should turn back. I suggested, my knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. That's when we saw it, a town seemingly materializing out of the twilight haze. Quaint houses lined quiet streets, Their windows dark and uninviting, a lone streetlight flickered at an intersection, casting an eerie glow over the deserted Main Street well. "This is charming," Jake said. Finally looking up from his phone, the sarcasm in his voice couldn't quite mask the nervousness underneath. I pulled up to a stop sign, peering down the empty streets. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what the silence was. Oppressive, broken only by the idle of our engine. "Let's just pass through, Sarah saw," said her voice barely above a whisper. "Find the highway on the other side." I nodded, pressing gently on. The gas, we crawled through the town, our headlights. Illuminating abandoned storefronts and overgrown lawns, it was as if the entire population had simply vanished. We were halfway through town when our engine sputtered and died. "No, no, no," I muttered. Turning the key frantically, the engine wheezed but refused to start. "Guys," Jake's voice was tense. "Look," I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. Figures were emerging from the shadows, their movements slow and deliberate. They converged on our car from all directions, their faces hidden in the growing darkness. "Lock the doors," Sarah yelled, but I was already fumbling with the controls. The click of the locks engaging seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night we sat there. Hearts pounding as the figures drew closer, I could make out their features now. Blank. Expressions' eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. A tap on my window made me jump. An old woman stood there, her face inches from the glass. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear against my better judgment. I cracked the window just an inch. "Can you help us?" I asked, my voice shaking. Our car broke down the old woman's face, split into a grin, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "Oh, we can help you," she said, her voice raspy and cold. "We've been waiting for you." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, waiting for us?" Her grin widened. "It's been so long since we've had visitors, so long since we've been able to feed." I slammed the window shut, my heart racing. "We need to get out of here now." Jake was already trying the back doors, but they wouldn't budge. "They're jammed," he yelled, panic evident in his voice. The figures were pressed against the car, now their hands leaving smears on the windows. I could hear a low chanting, the words indistinguishable but filled with malice. Sarah let out a strangled cry. The windows, look at the windows. I watched in horror as the glass began to fog, intricate patterns of frost spreading across the surface. The temperature inside the car plummeted, our breath coming out invisible. Puffs. What's happening? Jake's voice was high with fear. I didn't have an answer. I turned the key. Again, praying for the engine to start. It coughed once, twice, and then roared to life. "Hold on," I yelled, slamming the car and drive. We lurched forward, the figures scattering before us. I didn't slow down, didn't look back. Just pressed the gas pedal to the floor and drove. The town streets seemed to shift and change as we sped through them. Familiar landmarks appearing in impossible places. Every turn led us back to the center of town, the old woman's cackling laughter echoing in our ears. "We can't get out." Sarah sobbed from the back seat. "They won't let us leave." I gritted my teeth, determination replacing fear. "Yes, we can. We have to." I made a hard right tires, squealing on the pavement. There at the end of the street was the "Welcome to Millbrook" sign our way out. The engine whined as I pushed it to its limits. The sign grew larger in our windshield, 50 feet, 25 feet, 10 feet. Suddenly, a wall of townspeople materialized before us, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I hesitated for a split second, then pressed the gas harder. "Hold on," I screamed as we plowed into the crowd. There was a sickening thud, and then we were through. The "Welcome to Millbrook" sign disappeared in our rearview mirror, along with the nightmare town we drove in silence for miles. The adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. It wasn't until the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon that I finally felt safe enough to pull over. We sat there on the side of the highway, trying to process what had happened. Our car was dented and scratched, evidence that the night's events weren't just a shared hallucination. What were they? Sarah finally asked, her voice horror. I shook my head. "I don't know, and I don't want to know." Jake, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. Guys, look at this. He held up his phone, showing us a web search he managed to do. Once we'd gotten back in range, the headline made my blood run cold. Millbrook, the town that disappeared. The article went on to describe how 50 years ago the entire population of Millbrook had vanished. Overnight, searches had turned up nothing. The town had been abandoned, left to rot. But we were just there. Sarah whispered, "We saw them." I started the car, my hand shaking slightly. "Let's get out of here. I don't ever want to take a shortcut again." As we pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd escaped something ancient and hungry, something that would be waiting for the next unsuspecting travelers to stumble into its trap. I pressed the gas pedal harder, eager to put as much distance between us and Millbrook as possible, but even as the miles ticked by, I couldn't escape the memory of those glowing eyes or the old woman's words echoing in my mind. "We've been waiting for you." I shuddered, knowing that somewhere behind us in a town that shouldn't exist, they were still waiting. And I prayed that no one else would ever take that fatal wrong turn into Millbrook. The air in the lab felt different that night, thicker somehow, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd been working late as usual, poring over data from our latest experiments, but something wasn't right. The numbers didn't add up, and the silence in the normally bustling research facility was deafening. I stretched my back, cracking after hours hunched over my computer. That's when I noticed it, a faint blue glow emanating from beneath the door of Dr. Erickson's office. Odd, he'd left hours ago along with the rest of the staff. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached the door, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As I got closer, I could hear a low hum, barely audible but unmistakably there. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. I knew I shouldn't be snooping, but something compelled me forward. The door creaked open and I gasped. Dr. Erickson's usually immaculate office was in disarray. Papers were strewn everywhere and strange symbols were scrawled across his whiteboards. But what caught my eye was the source of the blue glow, a small device on his desk pulsing with an otherworldly light. I stepped closer, transfixed. The device looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was roughly the size of a softball, covered in intricate etchings that seemed to shift and change. As I watched, the humming grew louder as I approached, and I could feel a strange vibration in the air without thinking. I reached out to touch it the moment my fingers made contact. A jolt of electricity shot through my body. Images flashed before my eyes. Strange landscapes, bizarre creatures, advanced technology beyond my wildest imagination. And then darkness I came to on the floor, my head throbbing. How long had I been out? I checked my watch and felt my stomach drop. 3 hours had passed, all on, but it felt like only seconds scrambling to my feet. I looked around wildly. The device was gone. In its place was a note written in Dr. Erickson's messy scrawl. "If you're reading this, I'm sorry you were never supposed to see this run before they find you too." My mind raced. Who were all they? What had I stumbled into? I didn't have time to ponder these questions. A noise from the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps, steps heavy and purposeful, were approaching. I ducked behind Dr. Erickson's desk, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The door opened and 2 men entered. Their voices were low, but I could make out snippets of their conversation compromised. "We need to contain this. What about the girl? The new researcher, she knows too much. Take care of it." I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. They were talking about me. I had to get out of there as quietly as I could. I crawled towards the window. It was a long drop to the ground, but I didn't have a choice. Just as I was about to make my move, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, coming face to face with one of the men. His eyes were cold, devoid of any emotion going somewhere. He asked, his voice chillingly calm. I reacted on instinct, driving my elbow into his solar plexus. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I bolted for the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The hallway was a blur as I ran, alarms blaring in my wake. I could hear shouts behind me, footsteps giving chase. I took random turns, hoping to lose them in the mosaic layout of the facility. I burst through a set of double doors and found myself in the main laboratory. Rows of experiments lined the walls, each more bizarre than the last, but I didn't have time to contemplate the strangeness of it all. I needed a way out. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the lab, partially hidden behind a large piece of equipment, was a door I'd never noticed before. It was unmarked with no visible handle or lock, but as I approached it, slid open silently without hesitation. I dashed through the door closed behind me with a soft hiss, plunging me into darkness for a moment. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. Then lights flickered on, revealing a long, sterile corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. I started walking, then running. The corridor seemed endless with no turns or doors in sight. Just as I was beginning to think I'd made a terrible mistake, I saw something ahead, another door, this one glowing with the same eerie blue light as the device in Dr. Erickson's office. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling as my fingers touched the cool metal. That same jolt of electricity coursed through me. More visions flashed before my eyes, but this time I understood them. They weren't just random images, but information, knowledge about things beyond our world, beyond our understanding of science and reality. The door swung open, revealing not another room or hallway, but a swirling vortex of energy. I stood on the threshold, my mind reeling from the influx of information and the impossible sight before me. I knew with a certainty that terrified me that stepping through that portal would change everything. I would never be able to return to my old life, my old understanding of the world, but staying meant capture, possibly worse. The sound of approaching footsteps made the decision for me. I took a deep breath and stepped into the unknown. The sensation was indescribable. It felt like I was being torn apart and put back together. Molecule by molecule, colors I had no names for swirled around me. Equations and formulas danced across my vision, explaining the very fabric of the universe, and then suddenly it was over. I found myself standing in a vast chamber unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls were made of a material that seemed to shift and change, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent. Strange machines hummed and pulsed, their purpose beyond my comprehension. "Welcome, Dr. Levine," a voice said behind me. I spun around to see Dr. Erickson standing there, but he looked different, older yet somehow more vital. His eyes held a wisdom and sadness that hadn't been there before. Before, what is this place? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's happening?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This, my dear, is where we truly push the boundaries of science, where we explore realities beyond our own," as he spoke. More people entered the chamber. Some looked human, others decidedly not. They all regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "You weren't supposed to find out about this." Dr. Erickson continued, "Not yet, but now that you're here, you have a choice to make." He gestured to a device on a nearby pedestal. It looked like a more advanced version of the one I'd touched in his office. "You can go back, we'll wipe your memory, and you can return to your old life, or I prompted, my heart racing, "or you can stay, join us. Help us unlock the secrets of the multiverse, but know this, if you choose to stay, there's no going back your old life. Everyone you've ever known or loved will be lost to you forever." I stood there, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to run back through that portal to forget everything I'd seen and return to the comfortable ignorance of my former life. But a larger part, the part that had always pushed me to question, to explore, to seek out the unknown, knew there was only one real choice. I took a deep breath and stepped towards the device. "Where do we start?" Dr. Erickson's face broke into a genuine smile. This time, "Welcome to the team. Dr. Levine, we have so much to show you." As the others gathered around, eager to begin my initiation into this new world of endless possibilities. I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and in terror. I had no idea what lay ahead, what wonders or horrors I might encounter, but I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same again. And as I gazed out at the shifting walls of the chamber, catching glimpses of other worlds, other realities, I realized that my journey into the unknown had only just begun. The old Victorian bed and breakfast loomed before me, its weathered facade a stark contrast to the quaint charm promised by the brochure. As I lugged my suitcase up the creaking steps, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. Something about this place felt off. I booked a weekend stay on a whim, desperate for a break from my hectic city life. The Willow Creek Inn had seemed perfect, secluded, historic, and supposedly home to the best blueberry pancakes in the state. But standing there, key in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. The door swung open before I could insert the key, revealing a petite woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Her smile was warm, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek Inn," she said. Her voice syrupy. "Sweet, you must be Emily. We've been expecting you." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the unease growing in my stomach. "That's me, thanks for having me." She ushered me inside, chattering about the inn's history and amenities, but I was only half listening. My attention caught by the strange symbols carved into the wooden banister. They looked ancient, almost runic. "Your room is on the 3rd floor," the innkeeper, who introduced herself as Mrs. Holloway, said, snapping me back to the present last door. "On the right, dinner is at 7 in the main dining room. Don't be late." There was something in her tone, a hint of threat. I shook my head, chiding myself for being paranoid. I was here to relax, not invent mysteries where there were none. As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the inn was. Weren't there supposed to be other guests? The brochure had mentioned the place being fully booked this time of year. My room was small but cozy, with floral wallpaper and a 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a museum. I unpacked quickly, eager to explore the grounds before dinner. The gardens behind the inn were beautiful, a riot of autumnal colors. But as I wandered deeper into the property, I noticed something strange. Hidden among the trees and bushes were small stone statues, their features worn. Smoothed by time, they all seemed to be facing in their blank eyes. Somehow accusing a twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around. A man stood there, tall and lean, with a gardener's apron tied around his waist. His smile was friendly, but there was something unsettling about his eyes, enjoying the gardens. "Miss?" he asked, his voice growly. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're lovely. Those statues are interesting." His smile faltered for a moment. "Ah, yes, family heirlooms. Those best not to pay them too much mind." Before I could ask what he meant, the dinner bell rang. The gardener's smile returned too wide and too bright. "Best hurry along now. Mrs. Holloway doesn't like to be kept waiting." I made my way back to the inn, my mind whirling with questions. As I entered the dining room, I was surprised to see other guests already seated. There were 5 of them, all middle-aged or older, all watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Mrs. Holloway appeared at my elbow, guiding me to an empty seat. "So glad you could join us." "Emily, we were just about to begin. The meal was delicious, but I barely tasted it." The conversation around the table was stilted and odd, full of inside jokes and meaningful glances that excluded me, and every time I tried to ask a question about the inn or the other guests, the subject was quickly changed. As dessert was served, a blood-red sorbet that Mrs. Holloway insisted was her special recipe. I noticed the other guests watching me expectantly. The room seemed to hold its breath as I took my first bite. The flavor exploded on my tongue, unlike anything I'd ever tasted before. It was delicious, but there was an underlying bitterness that made me uneasy as I swallowed. A wave of dizziness washed over me. "Are you all right, dear Mrs. Holloway?" asked her voice, sounding distant and distorted. Perhaps you should lie down?" I tried to stand, but my legs felt like lead. The room spun around me, the faces of the other guests blurring into grotesque masks. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Mrs. Holloway's smile, no longer warm but predatory. Woke with a start, my head pounding. I was back in my room, though I had no memory of how I'd gotten there. The clock on the bedside table read 3:33 a.m. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with a jolt that I wasn't alone. Shadowy figures stood around my bed, their features indistinct in the gloom. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak as the figures leaned closer. One of them spoke its voice, a dry whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once she's perfect, the ritual can begin. Panic surged through me, breaking whatever spell had held me immobile. I bolted upright, scrambling out of the bed and towards the door, but it was locked. The key nowhere in sight. The shadows advanced their forms, shifting and writhing in impossible ways. I pressed myself against the wall, desperately searching for a way out. That's when I saw it. A small trappo in the ceiling, almost hidden by the room's ornate molding. Without thinking, I grabbed the desk chair and climbed up, pushing at the trappo with all my strength. It gave way with a groan, and I pulled myself up into a dark, musty attic space. I could hear the shadows below their whispers growing angry and insistent. I crawled through the darkness, cobwebs clinging to my face and arms, until I found another trappo. This one opened into a hallway I didn't recognize. The inn seemed to have transformed in the night. The hallways twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, and the paintings on the walls seemed to watch me as I ran past. I could hear chanting now coming from somewhere deep within the building. I turned a corner and found myself at the top of the main staircase. The front door was just below my chance at escape, but as I started down the steps, I saw them Miss Holloway, the gardener, and the other guests standing in a circle in the foyer. They were wearing robes now, deep crimson with those strange symbols embroidered in gold. Mrs. Holloway looked up her eyes. Meeting mine, the kindly innkeeper was gone, replaced by something ancient and hungry there. "You are my dear," she said, her voice resonating with power. "We've been waiting for you. It's time to take your place in the circle." I turned to run back up the stairs, but the shadows were there blocking my path. I was trapped. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" The gardener stepped forward, his face twisted into a cruel smile. "We need new blood, fresh energy to keep our little arrangement going. And you, my dear, are perfect." As they closed in around me, I realized with horror that the symbols on their robes were moving, slithering across the fabric like living things. The chanting grew louder, and I could feel a pressure building in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm. In desperation, I lashed out, pushing past Mrs. Holloway and making a break for the door. But as my hand closed around the knob, a searing pain shot through my arm. I looked down to see one of those symbols burning itself into my skin. The door swung open, but instead of the gardens and the road beyond, there was only swirling darkness. I stood on the threshold, the chanting reaching a fever pitch behind me, the darkness beckoning before me. In that moment, I understood that I had a choice to make. I could surrender to whatever ritual they had planned, become a part of this twisted place, or I could step into the unknown, facing whatever horror lurked in that swirling void, with one last look at the grotesque faces of my would-be captors. I made my choice. I stepped forward, letting the darkness envelop me. I'd like to say that I escaped, that I found my way back to my normal life. But the truth is, I'm not sure where I am or what I've become. Sometimes I catch glimpses of other places, other realities, and sometimes in quiet moments I can still hear the chanting. All I know for certain is this: be careful where you choose to stay. Some ends cater to more than just weary travelers, and some vacations can last an eternity. The first thing I noticed when I entered my new apartment was the silence, not the peaceful quiet of a well-insulated building, but an oppressive stillness that seemed to swallow every sound. My footsteps, usually echoing on hardwood floors, were muffled as if I were walking on cotton. Even the thud of my suitcase hitting the ground was oddly muted. I'd been thrilled to find this place a spacious one-bedroom in the heart of the city for a price that seemed too good to be true. As I stood in the entryway, a chill running down my spine. Despite the summer heat outside, I began to wonder if it was "get a grip, Sarah," I muttered to myself, my voice sounding strange in the quiet. "It's just an apartment," I began to unpack, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. The previous tenant had left some furniture behind: a battered couch, a rickety dining table, and a large antique mirror that dominated one wall of the living room. As I passed by it, I could have sworn I saw something move in its reflection, just at the edge of my vision. Vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood that seemed far too loud in the stillness around 3 a.m. I heard it a soft tapping like fingernails on glass. It seemed to be coming from the living room. Heart pounding, I crept out of bed. The tea-in grew louder as I approached the living room. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, I could see the source. The mirror, something was moving inside it. A dark shape that didn't match my reflection. I froze, unable to look away as the shape grew more distinct. It was a face gaunt and pale with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, a hand pressed against the glass from the other side. Long fingers sped as if trying to push through. I screamed, the sound shockingly loud in the quiet apartment. The face in the mirror twisted into a grotesque smile and then vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, lights blazing, too terrified to sleep. When dawn finally broke, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, a product of stress and an overactive imagination. But as the days passed, strange occurrences became impossible to ignore. Objects would move when I wasn't looking, always just slightly out of place. The tapping would come at night, sometimes from the mirror, sometimes from the walls or the windows, and always. There was that oppressive silence as if the very air was holding its breath. I tried to leave to break my lease and find somewhere else to live, but every time I made plans to move out, something would go wrong. My car would break down, my bank account would end seriously empty. Potential new apartments would fall through at the last minute. It was as if the building itself was conspiring to keep me there. A week turned into a month, and I found myself growing accustomed to the strangeness. I avoided looking directly at the mirror, ignored the tapping. At night, pretended not to notice when things weren't quite where I'd left them. I told myself I was adapting, but deep down I knew I was slowly losing my grip on reality. It was on a Tuesday night that everything changed. I was cooking dinner, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. When I cut my finger, a drop of blood fell to the floor and the apartment seemed to shudder. The silence and ever-present suddenly broke. A low hum filled the air. Growing louder by the second, the lights flickered and I could hear whispers coming from every corner of the room. I ran to the living room, drawn by an urge I couldn't explain. The mirror was vibrating, its surface rippling like water, and in its depths I could see them, dozens of faces, all pale and gaunt, all wearing the same desperate expression. "Help us," they whispered, their voices, a cacophony of pleading, "Free us." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking, "and what do you want?" One face put P forward, becoming clearer than the rest. It was a woman, her eyes sunken and sad. "We are the ones who came before," she said, "trapped by the hunger of this place. It feeds on us, on our fear and despair. But you can end this." I shook my head, backing away. "I don't understand. How can I help you?" The woman's expression turned urgent. "The blood," she said, "your blood is the key willingly given. It can break the spell. Please help us." Before I could respond, the mirror went still, the faces fading away. The apartment fell silent once more, but it felt different now, expectant, as if waiting for my decision. I spent the next few days in a daze torn between disbelief and a growing certainty that what I had seen was real. I researched the history of the building, discovering a pattern of disappearances and strange occurrences stretching back decades. Previous tenants who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind all their belongings, reports of odd noises and moving shadows. As I dug deeper, I found mentions of an old ritual, something about blood freely given under a full moon. The details were vague, but it all seemed to point to the mirror in my living room. The next full moon was in 3 days. I knew I had a choice to make. I could leave, abandon this cursed apartment and try to forget everything I'd seen, or I could stay and try to help the trapped souls I'd glimpsed in the mirror when the night of the full moon arrived. I stood before the mirror, a small knife in my hand. The apartment was alive with energy, the air thick with anticipation as the moonlight streamed through the window, casting an ethereal glow on the mirror surface. I took a deep breath and made my choice. I pressed the knife to my palm, wincing as it bit into my skin. A line of red welled up, and I held my hand out to the mirror. "I give this freely," I said, my voice steadier than I felt to break the spell and set you free the moment my blood touched the glass. Everything changed. The mirror's surface rippled and swirled, and I could hear a sound like shattering glass, though the mirror remained intact. The room filled with a blinding light, and I could feel a rush of wind carrying with it the whispers of 1,000 voices. When the light faded and my vision cleared, I gasped. The apartment looked different, brighter somehow, as if a veil had been lifted. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of a city building in the mirror. The mirror was just a mirror, now reflecting nothing but my own shocked face. In the days that followed, I learned the full story from my neighbors, real living people I had somehow never seen before. The building had been under a curse for generations, trapping the souls of its tenants and feeding off their energy. My blood, willingly given, had broken the spell. I thought about moving out, about leaving behind the memories of those terrifying months. But in the end, I decided to stay. This apartment, once a prison, now felt like home. And sometimes when the light hits the mirror just right, I catch a glimpse of smiling faces, the ones I set free, thanking me for breaking their chains. As I write this, I can't help but wonder how many other buildings out there are hiding dark secrets. How many cursed spaces are waiting for someone to break their spell? I may never know the answer, but I do know this: I'll never take silence for granted again. Sometimes the quietest places hide the loudest secrets. The neon sign of the 24-hour diner flickered weakly in the pre-dawn darkness, a beacon of artificial light in an otherwise desolate stretch of highway. I pushed open the glass door, the bell above it chiming softly, announcing my arrival to the near-empty establishment. It was my third night shift this week at the round-the-clock cafe, and already the place was starting to feel more familiar than my own apartment. As I tied my apron around my waist, I noticed them again. The regulars, always the same. 5 people, always at the same table in the far corner. They were there every night I worked from open to close, nursing cups of coffee that never seemed to empty. There was something off about them, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way they never seemed to eat, or how their hushed conversations would abruptly stop whenever I approached their table, or perhaps it was their eyes always watching, always following my every move with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Hey, Sarah," my coworker Jake called from behind the counter. "You're just in time for the graveyard." "Special." I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. "Great, let me guess, more burnt coffee and stale donuts." Jake chuckled, but it sounded hollow in the quiet diner. "You know it." "Hey, have you noticed anything weird about those guys?" He nodded towards the corner table. I hesitated, relief flooding through me at the realization that I wasn't the only one who felt it. "Yeah, actually, they're here every night, aren't they?" Jake leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not just every night, they never leave." I asked Marge about it. She works the day shift, says she's never seen them come or go. They're just always here. A chill ran down my spine. That's impossible. The diner closes for cleaning every Sunday morning. They can't just... The bell above the door chimed. Cutting me off, a truck driver walked in, rubbing his blurry eyes. Jake straightened up, plastering on his customer service smile. "We'll talk later," he muttered as the night wore on. I found my gaze continually drawn to the corner table the regulars sat in. Eerie stillness, their coffee cups perpetually full, despite never being refilled. Once I could have sworn I saw one of them, a gaunt man with deep-set eyes flicker like a faulty hologram. But when I blinked, he was solid again around 3 a.m. The diner emptied out, leaving just me, Jake, and the regulars. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional clink of a coffee cup being set down. "I'm going to take out the trash," Jake announced, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet diner. I nodded, grateful for the chance to be alone with my thoughts. As soon as the back door swung shut behind Jake, one of the regulars stood up. It was a woman, her hair a shock of white against pale skin. She moved towards the counter with an unnatural grace, her feet seeming to glide across the linoleum floor. "Sarah," she said, her voice a dry whisper that somehow carried across the room. "We need to talk." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. How did she know my name? I never wore a name tag. I'm sorry, but I don't. You've noticed us. She interrupted now, standing directly in front of me, this close. I could see that her eyes were completely black. No whites or irises visible. You felt it, haven't you? The wrongness of this place. I swallowed hard, unable to look away from those bottomless eyes. What are you talking about? Who are you people? She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp to be human. We are the Watchers, the Guardians, and you. Sarah have been chosen before I could respond. The lights flickered violently in that moment of darkness. I felt a cold hand grasp my wrist when the light stabilized. I found myself standing in the middle of the diner, surrounded by the 5 regulars. Jake was nowhere to be seen. "Got what's happening?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Where's Jake?" The gaunt man I'd seen flicker earlier stepped forward. "Jake is no longer with us. He served his purpose." A wave of nausea washed over me as the implications of his words sank in. You killed him." The white-haired woman shook her head. "Not killed, transformed as you will be." They began to chant in a language I didn't recognize their voices, blended into a discordant harmony that made my head spin. The diner around us began to warp and twist, the walls melting away to reveal a vast starry void. "We are the guardians of the threshold," the woman explained, her voice echoing strangely in the impossible space. "This diner sits at the crossroads of realities we keep. The balance prevent the worlds from bleeding into each other, but our time is ending. We need a replacement." I shook my head, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. "Why me? I'm nobody special. I'm just a waitress." The gaunt man laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "You were drawn here for a reason. Sarah, you can feel the thinness of reality in this place. You have the potential to see beyond the veil." As he spoke, I began to see glimpses of other worlds superimposed over our own creatures, of impossible geometry drifting through the void. The true nature of the diner, a nexus point where countless realities intersected. "No," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real. It can't be." "Oh, but it is." The woman said, her voice almost gentle, "And now you have a choice to make. Join us, take your place as a guardian." Or she left the alternative unspoken, but I could feel the threat hanging in the air. I thought of Jake, of his mysterious disappearance, of all the other employees who had come and gone over the years, never to be seen again. What happens if I say no? I asked already. Knowing the answer, the regulars exchanged glances, their black eyes glittering in the starlight. "Then we find someone else in you. Well, let's just say you won't be working the night shift anymore." I took a deep breath, weighing my options. On one hand, everything I knew about reality had just been shattered. The idea of becoming some interdimensional guardian was terrifying. But on the other hand, the alternative seemed far worse if I agree. I said slowly, "What exactly would I be doing?" The woman smiled, seeming pleased by my question. "You would join us in our vigil watch for signs of incursion from other realities, maintain the balance, and occasionally guide lost souls back to where they belong." As she spoke, I saw flashes of what my life could become: endless nights in the diner watching the EB and flow of realities, the power to peer into other worlds, to shape the very fabric of existence. It was overwhelming, but also strangely enticing. "Okay," I heard myself say, as if from a great distance, "I'll do it." The chanting resumed louder. This time I felt a strange energy coursing through my body, rewriting my very essence. My vision blurred, and for a moment I could see everything. Every possible reality, every potential future. When it was over, I found myself back in the diner. Everything looked the same and yet different. I could see the thin spots now, the places where realities bled into each other, and I understood my role in keeping them separate. The regulars, my new companions, nodded approvingly. "Welcome, Sarah," the woman said. "Take your seat." Our vigil continues. As I sat down at the corner table, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. My eyes were black now like theirs. I was no longer just Sarah the waitress. I was a guardian of reality, a watcher at the crossroads. The bell above the door chimed and a tired-looking man walked in. I smiled, knowing that to him I was just another late-night customer. But I could see the truth now. I could see everything. And as I settled in for my eternal shift at the round-the-clock cafe, I couldn't help but wonder how many other seemingly ordinary places held secrets like this. How thin is the veil between worlds, really? But those were questions for another time. For now, I had a job to do, a reality to protect, and an endless supply of coffee to drink. The first red flag should have been the rent $500 a month for a spacious room in a Victorian house. Utilities included in the heart of Boston. It was too good to be true. True, but I was a broke college student desperate for a place to live, and Mr. Blackwood's kind smile and grandfatherly demeanor had won me over instantly. "Welcome home, Alice," he'd said, handing me the old brass key. "I'm sure you'll be very happy here now." 3 months later, as I lay in my bed listening to the sounds of footsteps pacing in the room above, a room I knew to be empty, I realized just how wrong I'd been. It started small things. An invisible hand. Mr. Blackwood stood in the doorway, but he didn't look grandfatherly anymore. His eyes were fully yellow now, his smile revealing teeth that were far too sharp now. "Now, Alice," he said, his voice overlaid with that deep, growly tone I'd heard in his office, "there's no need to rush off. You've been chosen for a great honor." Behind him, I could see the other tenants gathering in the hallway. Their eyes were all glowing yellow, their bodies shifting and changing into forms that were no longer human. I backed up against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. But as Mr. Blackwood advanced, his form growing and twisting into something monstrous, I knew this was all too real. In that moment of pure terror, something inside me snapped to strength I didn't know I possessed, surged through me. I grabbed the heavy lamp from my bedside table and swung it with all my might at the window. The glass shattered, and without a second thought, I leapt. We were only on the 7th floor, second floor, but the fall seemed to last an eternity. I hit the ground, hard pain shooting through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. I ran into the night, not daring to look back behind me. I could hear inhuman shrieks and the sound of pursuit, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I don't know how long I ran or how far I went when I finally stopped gasping for breath. I found myself in a busy part of the city. I didn't recognize the normal sounds of traffic, and people felt surreal after what I just experienced. I never went back to that house. I reported everything to the police, but of course they didn't believe me when they went to investigate. They found the house empty. No sign of Mr. Blackwood or any of the other tenants, just an abandoned old Victorian with no evidence of the horrors I'd witnessed sometimes. Late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, certain I can hear that soft tapping on my door, tap, tap, tap. And in my darkest moments, I wonder if I ever really escaped at all, or if this is just another layer of their twisted game. One thing's for certain, I'll never again be tempted by an offer that seems too good to be true, because sometimes the real price is far higher than you could ever imagine. The wind howled like a wounded animal driving snow horizontally across the windshield. I could barely see 10 feet in front of the car, let alone read the road signs. We were hopelessly lost in the middle of a blizzard. Our GPS long since given up trying to locate us. We need to find shelter, Mark said from the passenger seat, his voice tight with worry. The car is not going to make it much longer in this. As if on cue, the engine sputtered ominously. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, squinting into the whiteout conditions. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow. Look, I pointed, hope surging through me. Lights, there must be a building over there. I turned the car towards the glow, praying it wasn't just my imagination. As we got closer, a massive structure loomed out of the storm. It was an old ski lodge, its windows dark except for a single light. burning in what looked like a lobby. "Thank God," Mark breathed as I pulled into the snow-covered parking lot. "Let's hope someone's home." We grabbed our overnight bags and made a run for the entrance, the bitter cold biting at any exposed skin. The front door was unlocked, swinging open with a creak that echoed through the cavernous lobby. "Hello," I called out, stamping the snow from my boots. "Is anyone here?" Silence greeted us. The lobby was dimly lit by a single lamp on the reception desk, casting long shadows across the room. A thick layer of dust covered everything, and the air smelled musty as if the place hadn't been opened in years. "This doesn't look good," Mark muttered, moving closer to me. "Maybe we should try somewhere else." I shook my head. The car is not going to start again in this cold, and we freeze if we try to walk. We don't have a choice. As if to emphasize my point, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows. Mark nodded reluctantly. "I guess you're right, but I don't like this." "Sarah, something feels off." I couldn't argue with that. The entire lodge had an eerie, abandoned feel to it, but it was shelter from the storm, and right now, that was all that mattered. We made our way to the reception desk, hoping to find some clue about the lodge's current status. The guest book was open, its last entry dated over 5 years ago. A thin film of dust covered the pen lying next to it. "I don't think anyone's been here for a long time," I said, running my finger through the dust on the desk. Mark was examining a bulletin board on the wall. "Look at this," he called. I joined him, squinting at the faded notices pinned haphazardly to the cork. Most were typical ski lodge announcements, trail maps, weather advisories, lost and found items, but one. I tucked in the corner, caught my eye. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local Legend or Deadly Truth, The Curse of Whispering Pines Lodge." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold as I read the article. It spoke of mysterious disappearances over the years of guests who checked in but never checked out the locals, blamed it on an old Native American curse, but the authorities had never found any evidence of foul play. "This has to be some kind of joke," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They probably made it up to drum up business, create a spooky atmosphere for the tourists." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. We decided to find a room for the night, figuring we'd sort everything out of in the morning when the storm had passed. The key rack behind the desk was full, so we picked one at random and headed up the grand staircase to the second floor. The room was basic but clean, with 2 twin beds and a small bathroom. It looked like it hadn't been touched since the lodge closed, perfectly preserved, like some kind of time capsule. "Well, it's not the Ritz, but it'll do," Mark said, forcing a smile. "Let's get some sleep. Things will look better in the morning." I wasn't so sure about that, but I was exhausted. We settled into our separate beds, the howling wind outside serving as an eerie lullaby. I don't know how long I slept before the noise woke me. At first I thought it was just the storm, but as I became more alert, I realized it was coming from inside the lodge. Footsteps moving down the hallway outside our room. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Mark," I whispered, "do you hear that?" He stirred, then sat up quickly. Footsteps, but I thought we were alone here. The steps grew closer, then stopped right outside our door. We held our breath, staring at the doorknob. Slowly, it began to turn. Mark was out of bed in an instant, pressing his weight against the door. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaky. No answer, just more turning of the doorknob. More insistent now, I joined Mark at the door, adding my weight to his. "We're armed," I lied, hoping to scare off whoever was out there. "Leave us alone." The pressure on the door suddenly stopped. We listened intently, but could hear nothing but the wind outside. After what felt like an eternity, we heard footsteps again. This time, moving away from our door, we stayed there, pressed against the door for several more minutes before daring to move. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered. I shook my head too. Shaken to speak, we spent the rest of the night huddled together on one bed, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, we made a decision, storm or no storm. We had to get out of there. We packed our bags quickly and quietly, then crept out into the hallway. The lodge looked different in the pale morning light. Somehow more sinister shadows seemed to move in the corners of our vision, and I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from behind closed doors. We were halfway down the grand staircase when we saw them, footprints in the dust leading from the front door and up the stairs. They weren't ours. "Run," Mark said, his voice tight with fear. We bolted down the stairs and out the front door, not daring to look back. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow. Our car was buried under a thick white blanket. Forget the car. I gasped, fumbling for my phone. We need to call for help, but as I pulled out my phone, I froze. The screen showed the date. 3 days later than it should have been. We'd been in the lodge for 3 days, not one night. A noise from inside the lodge made us both jump without a word. We started running, plowing through the deep snow towards the main road. We were picked up an hour later by a passing snowplow. The driver looked at us strangely when we told him where we'd been. A Whispering Pines lodge. He said, frowning, "That place burned down years ago. There's nothing left but ruins." Mark and I exchanged horrified glances. What had we experienced? Where had we really been for those missing days? As we drove away, I looked back one last time through the trees. I could just make out the lodge, standing tall and imposing against the snow-covered mountains, and in one of the upper windows I saw a figure watching us leave. I blinked and it was gone. In its place stood the charred ruins the snowplow driver had described to this day. I don't know what happened to us at Whispering Pines Lodge, but sometimes on cold winter nights when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can hear distant whispers calling me back to that impossible place where time stands still and the dead walk among the living. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that someday, somehow I'll find myself back there, because some places, once they've claimed you, never really let you go. The GPS blinked out just as I turned onto the unmarked dirt road. One moment it was confidently guiding me through the winding back roads of rural Pennsylvania, and the next nothing static filled the screen, then went dark. I tapped it frustratedly, but the device remained stubbornly lifeless. "Great," I muttered, peering through the windshield at the dense forest. Surrounding me, the late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the trees, casting long shadows across the narrow road. I was already running late for my cousin's wedding, and now this I considered turning back. But the thought of retracing the last hour of complicated turns was daunting. Surely this road had to lead somewhere. I pressed on, hoping to find a town or at least someone who could point me in the right direction. The trees grew thicker as I drove, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the fading daylight. An uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something about this place felt off. The forest was too quiet, devoid of the usual chirping of birds or rustling of small animals. Just as I was about to give up and turn around, the trees suddenly parted, revealing a small town nestled in a clearing. Relief washed over me as I pulled onto the main street, lined with quaint storefront that looked like they belonged in another century. A few people milled about on the sidewalks, all dressed in oddly old-fashioned clothing. They turned to stare as I drove past, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and was that fear. I parked in front of what looked like a general store and stepped out of the car. Stretching my legs, the air felt different here, heavier somehow, with a faint metallic tang that made me wrinkle my nose. "Excuse me," I called out to an elderly man sweeping the storefront. "Could you tell me where I am? My GPS stopped working and I'm a bit lost." The man froze, his broom clattering to the ground. He stared at me with wide, frightened eyes before hurrying inside the store, slamming the door behind him. Bewildered, I turned to see a small group of townspeople had gathered. Watching me intently, their gazes made my skin crawl. A woman stepped forward, her long skirt swishing against the dusty road. "Welcome to Millbrook," she said, her voice carrying a strange accent I couldn't place. "We don't get many visitors here, I can see that." I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the growing sense of unease. "I'm just passing through. Could you point me towards the highway? I'm trying to get to Pittsburgh." The woman's brow furrowed. "Pittsburgh? I'm afraid I don't know of such a place, but you're welcome to stay here in Millbrook. We always have room for one more alarm. Bells were ringing in my head now. How could she not know Pittsburgh? And the way she said, always have room for one more, it sent a chill down my spine. That's very kind, I said, backing towards my car, but I really should be going. My family's expecting me. As I reached for the door handle, I felt a hand on my arm. A man had appeared beside me, his grip unnaturally strong now. Now he said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "There's no need to rush off. Why don't you join us for dinner? We're always eager to hear news from the outside world." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Please," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to leave." The crowd had grown larger now, pressing in around me. Their faces were a mix of hunger and anticipation, like predators cornering their prey. Panic surged through me. I wrenched my arm free and dove into my car, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse tires, squealing. As I backed away from the advancing crowd, I spun the car around and floored racing. Back the way I'd come, in my rearview mirror, I could see the town's people flooding into the street. Their faces twisted with rage, the forest seemed to close in around me as I sped down the dirt road. Branches scraping against the sides of my car, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. What the hell had just happened? I drove for what felt like hours, the scenery never changing. The same trees, the same bends in the road. It was as if I was driving in circles. Darkness had fallen completely now, and my headlights barely penetrated the thick fog that had rolled in just as despair was starting to set in. I saw lights ahead, civilization. I pressed the gas harder, eager to put as much distance between me and Millbrook as possible. As I burst out of the tree line, I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop. There in front of me was Millbrook, the exact same main street, the exact same buildings. It was impossible. I'd been driving away from the town, hadn't I? The town's people were there waiting. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting my headlights like animals caught in a spotlight. I threw the car into reverse, but the engine sputtered and died. No matter how many times I turned the key, it wouldn't start. The woman who had greeted me earlier approached my car, that same eerie smile on her face. "You see," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the closed windows, "Millbrook always has room for one more, and once you're here, you can never leave." Tears of frustration and fear streamed down my face as I continued to try to start the car. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. A tap on my window made me jump. The man who had grabbed me earlier was there, his face pressed against the glass. "Come now," he said, his voice muffled but still audible. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Accept your new home." I shook my head violently, pressing the lock button. Even though I knew it was futile, they began to rock the car, their inhuman strength, evident as my vehicle swayed back and forth in desperation. I grabbed my phone. Still no signal, but maybe I pulled up the map app, praying for a miracle. To my shock, it opened, showing my location, but what I saw made my blood run cold. According to the map, I was in the middle of nowhere. No roads, no towns. For miles, just an empty patch of forest where Millbrook now stood. A crack appeared in my windshield as the townspeople's assault on my car intensified. I knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through. That's when I saw it, a faint shimmer in the air. Just at the edge of town, it looked like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but in the cool night air, that was impossible. Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and flung open the car door, catching my attackers. By surprise, I ran pushing past, grasping hands and angry shouts. My lungs burned as I sprinted towards that strange shimmer, praying it was some kind of way out. The air grew thick as I approached. Like running through water behind me, I could hear the townsfolk in pursuit. Their voices distorted and alien with one last burst of energy. I threw myself at the shimmer. There was a moment of resistance, like pushing through a rubber membrane, and then I was falling, tumbling down a steep embankment. I hit the ground hard. The breath knocked out of me as I lay there gasping. I heard a sound that made me want to cry with relief. Traffic struggling to my feet. I saw I was on the side of a highway. My clothes were torn and dirty, and I was covered in scratches from my fall, but I was alive. And more importantly, I was free. A car pulled over the driver, leaning out with a concerned expression. "Are you okay, miss? Do you need help?" I nodded too. Overwhelmed to speak, as I climbed into his car, I glanced back at the forest I'd emerged from for a moment. I thought I saw faces watching me from between the trees, but when I blinked, they were gone. The driver, a kinfac older man, listened patiently as I recounted my experience, leaving out the more unbelievable parts. He assumed I'd gotten lost in the woods and been wandering for hours. I didn't correct him as we drove towards Pittsburgh. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. I kept expecting to see Millbrook appear around every bend, its inhabitants waiting to reclaim me. Even now, years later, I avoid back roads in small towns. I keep my GPS updated and always tell someone where I'm going, because I know that somewhere out there, hidden from the modern world, Millbrook is waiting, and it always has room for one more. The mop hit the floor with a wet slap, echoing through the empty hallways of Pinnacle Industries at 2 a.m. The sprawling office complex was a different world. No bustling executives, no clicking heels. Just me and the endless stretch of polished floors. I've been working the night shift as a janitor for 6 months, and the solitude had become almost comforting almost tonight, though something felt off. The air was thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease. "Get it together, Mike," I muttered to myself. "It's just another night." I wheeled my cart down the corridor, the squeaky wheel of familiar company on in the silence. As I approached the executive Sue's on the top floor, I noticed a sliver of light spilling from beneath a door. Odd the big wigs never worked. This late curiosity got the better of me. I inched closer, straining to hear any sound from within. Muffled voices drifted through the door, urgent and agitated. "We need to move the shipment tonight," a man's voice hissed. "The feds are closing in. My blood ran cold feds shipments." This wasn't your typical late-night business meeting. "What about the night janitor?" A woman responded, her tone sharp with worry. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it through the door. "Leave him to me," the man replied, his voice chilling in its casualness. "No." Loose ends, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked, sent me stumbling backward. I had to get out of there fast. I abandoned my cart and ran for the stairs, not daring to wait for the elevator. As I burst through the stairwell door, I heard shouts behind me. They knew I was here, taking the stairs 3 at a time. I flew down flight after flight, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of heavy footsteps and angry voices echoed above me, growing closer with each passing second. I exploded out of the stairwell on the ground floor, sprinting across the lobby towards the main entrance. My hand had just touched the door when a bullet whizzed past my ear, shattering the glass. Instinct took over. I dove behind a large potted plant, my mind racing. The front door was out. I needed another way out. My eyes landed on the service entrance across the lobby. It was a long shot, but it was my only chance, taking a deep breath. I made a break for it. Bullets peppered the floor around me as I zigzagged across the open space. I slammed into the service door, fumbling with my keyring. "Come on, come on!" The lock clicked open. Just as a hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around, I found myself face to face with a man in an expensive suit, his eyes cold and deadly, end of the line of janitor. He sneered, raising his gun in that moment. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel aim squarely at my chest. But I also saw something else. A fire extinguisher mounted on the wall beside me. Without thinking, I grabbed it and swung with all my might. The heavy canister connected with the man's head with a sickening crunch. He crumpled to the floor, his gun clattering away. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I burst through the service entrance and ran into the night, my feet pounding the pavement as I put as much distance between myself and Pinnacle Industries as possible. Hours later, huddled in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, I tried to make sense of what had happened. My hands shook as I clutched a cup of coffee, my mind replaying the night's events on a loop. What had I stumbled into? Drug trafficking, money laundering, whatever it was big enough to kill for, and now they knew my face. I knew I should go to the police. But would they believe enough janitor over the word of powerful executives? And even if they did, could they protect me? As the sun began to rise, casting a pale glow through the diner window, I made a decision. I couldn't go home. It would be the first place they'd look. I couldn't go to the cops. It was too risky. I had to disappear. I paid for my coffee with the crumpled bills in my pocket and walked out into the early morning light with nothing but the clothes on my back and the terrible knowledge in my head. I started walking where I didn't know, but anywhere had to be safer than here. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I moved from city to city, taking odd jobs and sleeping in cheap motels, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for them to find me. I tried to convince myself that they'd given up, that I was no longer a threat, but deep down I knew better. A corporation willing to kill to protect its secrets wouldn't just let a witness walk away. It was in a small town in the Midwest. Nearly a year after that fateful night that my past finally caught up with me, I was working as a dishwasher in a local diner, keeping my head down and saving up enough money to move on to the next town. The bell above the door jingled and I glanced up out of habit. My heart stopped there. Scanning the room with predatory eyes was the woman I'd heard that night at Pinnacle Industries. Our eyes met, and in that instant I knew my time was up. I bolted for the back door, ignoring the shouts of my confused co-workers. As I burst into the alley behind the diner, I heard the woman's cold voice. "He's running. Take him alive if you can, but don't let him get away." I ran like I'd never run before, my feet pounding the pavement as I weaved through back alleys and side streets, but they were always one step behind. No matter how many turns I took or how fast I ran, just when I thought my lungs would burst, I saw at a bus station, its neon open sign, a beacon of hope in the gathering dusk. I pushed myself harder, praying I could reach it before they caught up. I burst through the doors and startling the board. Looking ticket agent, 1 ticket, I gasped, slamming all the money I had onto the counter. "Anywhere. The next bus out, please." The agent blinked at me in Serp but began typing on her computer. "There's a bus leaving for Chicago in 5 minutes. She said I'll take it," I said. Snatching the ticket from her hand, I ran to the platform. Just as the bus was preparing to depart, as I climbed aboard, I saw my pursuers enter the station, their eyes scanning the crowd. The doors closed and the bus pulled away. I sank into a seat, my heart pounding. I'd bought myself some time, but I knew this was far from over as the bus merged onto the highway, carrying me towards yet another uncertain future. I couldn't help but laugh at the bitter irony. All those months ago, I'd been a simple night janitor, invisible to the world of corporate power and corruption. Now I was a man with no name, no home, and a target on my back. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the familiar landscape of my life disappear into the rearview mirror. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I knew one thing for certain: there was no going back. The night I picked up that mop at Pinnacle Industries was the night my old life ended. And this endless chase began as the miles ticked by. I closed my eyes, allowing myself a moment of rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, but for now, on this bus full of strangers, I was just another faceless traveler. And in that anonymity, I found a small measure of peace. The chase would resume soon enough, but for now I was safe. For now I could breathe, and in this world of shadows and secrets that was more than I could have hoped for. The keycard slid smoothly into the slot and the light flashed green. I pushed open the heavy door of room 1408. Wheeling my small suitcase behind me, the majestic hotel lived up to its name, all gleaming marble and plush carpets. But as I stepped into my room, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Everything looked perfect: crisp white sheets on the king-size bed, a stunning view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Yet something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air seemed thick, almost oppressive. I shook my head, chiding myself for being paranoid. It had been a long day of travel, and I was tired. A good night. Sleep was all I needed as I unpacked. I noticed small oddities. The TV remote was on the left side of the bed, though I distinctly remembered putting it on the right. When I first came in, a glass I was sure I'd left on the desk was now on the nightstand. Little things easy to dismiss, but unsettling. Nonetheless, I was here on business, a week-long conference that promised to be as dull as it was necessary. I'd chosen the Majestic for its proximity to the convention center and its stellar reviews. Now, as the sun set and shadows crept across the room, I was beginning to regret my choice. Sleep came fitfully that night. Strange noises kept waking me, scratching sounds from inside the walls, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Each time I jolted awake, heart racing, the room seemed different, furniture slightly out of place, shadows that didn't quite match the objects casting them by morning. I was exhausted and on edge, but in the harsh light of day, my fears seemed silly. Old hotels made noises. Housekeeping probably moved things while cleaning. There had to be logical explanations. The conference was as mind-numbing as expected, but I welcomed the distraction. It wasn't until I returned to my room that evening that the strangeness resumed the moment I opened the door. I knew someone or something had been there. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but the air felt different, charged somehow. And there on the pristine white duvet lay a single red rose. My blood ran cold. I hadn't ordered room service. I hadn't told anyone my room number. I snatched up the phone to call the front desk, but the line was dead static. Filled my cell phone when I tried to use it instead. That's when I noticed the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but something was wrong. It didn't match my movements exactly. There was a lag, almost imperceptible, but definitely there, and its eyes, they seemed to glow with an inner light that wasn't my own. I backed away, my heart pounding. This was impossible. I had to be hallucinating overtired and imagining things. I splashed cold water on my face, took deep breaths, tried to calm myself when I looked back at the mirror. My reflection was normal, but now the room behind me was different. Older somehow. The modern furnishings were replaced with antiques. Gaslight flickered where electric lamps had been. I spun around, but the room remained as it always had been. Modern, sleek, normal, it was only in the mirror that it had changed. A knock at the door made me jump. Housekeeping called. A cheerful voice relief washed over me. Another person, someone real and normal. I yanked open the door ready to pour out my bizarre experiences to whoever was there. The hallway was empty, hands shaking. I closed and locked the door. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I was losing my mind. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water would clear my head. As steam filled the bathroom, I could have sworn I heard music, old-fashioned, tiny-like, from a gramophone. It faded in and out, sometimes drowned by the sound of the wall water, sometimes crystal clear. When I stepped out of the shower, the mirror was fogged up. As I wiped away the condensation, words appeared as if written by an unseen hand. "Welcome home, darling, we've been waiting for you." I scrambled out of the bathroom, my wet feet slipping on the tile. The bedroom had transformed. Gone were the modern furnishings, replaced by heavy Victorian pieces. Gas lights flickered on the walls, and there, seated at a vanity that hadn't been there before, was a woman. She turned to face me, her pale face framed by elaborately styled dark hair. Her dress was from another century, all lace and corsets, but it was her eyes that captivated me, deep, dark, and utterly inhuman. "There you are," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "We've been so lonely without you." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I lunged for the door, but my hands passed right through the knob. The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, darling," she said, standing and gliding towards me. "Don't you remember you checked in long ago? 1898 to be precise. You can never leave, none of us." Ken, the room spun around me. Glimpses of other times. Other versions of this same room flashed before my eyes. I saw myself dressed in clothes from every decade of the past century, living and dying in this room over and over again. I remembered now the curse, the deal I'd made with something old and patient and hungry. I'd been trapped here for over 100 years, reliving the same week over and over. My memories wiped clean each time, only to be restored at the end. The woman, my wife, my jailer both reached for me, her cold hands cupping my face. It's time to start again. My love, shall we? The room blurred and shifted. I felt myself fading, my memories slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the woman's smile, cruel and beautiful. I blinked, disoriented. I was standing in the hallway of the majestic hotel, my suitcase beside me. I must have zoned out for a moment. Shaking my head to clear it, I slid my keycard into the lock of room 1408. The light flashed green and I pushed open the door as I stepped inside. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Everything looked perfect, but something felt off. I shook my head, chiding myself for being paranoid. It had been a long day of travel and I was tired. A good night's sleep was all I needed. As I unpacked, I noticed small oddities. The TV remote was on the left side of the bed, though I distinctly remembered putting it on the right when I first came in. A glass I was sure I'd left on the desk was now on the nightstand. Little things easy to dismiss, but unsettling. Nonetheless, I was here on business, a week-long conference that promised to be as dull as it was necessary. I'd chosen the Majestic for its proximity to the convention center and its stellar reviews. Now, as the sun set and shadows crept across the room, I was beginning to regret my choice. In the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement in the mirror, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there but my own reflection, tired and wary for a moment. Just a moment, I thought I saw something else in those familiar eyes, something old and patient and hungry. I blinked and it was gone, just my imagination. I told myself just another night in another hotel room, but as I turned away from the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd done this all before, that I would do it all again, and somewhere in a place I couldn't quite reach. I heard the echo of a woman's laughter, like the sound of breaking glass. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots was the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest I'd been hiking for hours. The sun now dipping below the tree line, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me with gnarled fingers. This was supposed to be a simple day hike, a chance to clear my head and enjoy the autumn colors. But as the light faded and the trail markers became harder to spot, a gnawing fear began to creep up my spine. I was lost. I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope that I'd somehow get a signal. Nothing. The battery icon blinked ominously, reminding me that I had maybe an hour left before even that lifeline was gone. Panic started to set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. No one knew exactly where I was. I hadn't told anyone. My specific plans, just that I was going for a hike. Stupid. So stupid. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and I wasn't equipped for a night in the woods. I had a light jacket, a nearly empty water bottle, and a granola bar. Not exactly survival gear. Just as I was contemplating my options, none of which seemed particularly promising, I spotted a flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Civilization, or at least another person who might be able to help. I veered off the trail, pushing through the underbrush towards the light. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a cabin. It was old, the wood weathered and gray, but there was definitely a warm glow coming from the windows. Relief flooded through me as I approached the porch. I raised my hand to knock, but hesitated. Something felt off. The light coming from inside didn't flicker like firelight or a lamp. It was steady, almost too steady, and had a strange bluish tint to it. Before I could decide whether to knock or retreat, the door creaked open. An old woman stood there, her face deeply lined, her white hair wild and unkempt, but it was her eyes. Eyes that caught me pale, almost colorless, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Well, well," she said, her voice raspy like dry leaves. A visitor. How unexpected. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was too exhausted, too desperate for help. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "I got lost on the trail and saw your light. Could you possibly point me in the direction of the ranger station, or maybe let me use a phone?" Her thin lips stretched into what I suppose was meant to be a smile, but looked more like a grimace. "Oh, my dear, there's no phone here, and the ranger station miles away. You'd never make it in the dark." She stepped back, gesturing inside. Come in, you can stay the night and we'll sort you out as in the morning. I hesitated, torn between my fear of this strange woman and my fear of spending the night alone in the increasingly dark and cold forest. In the end, practicality won out. I stepped inside. The interior of the cabin was odd. It was a single room sparsely furnished with ancient-looking pieces that seemed to belong in a museum, but scattered among the antiques were incongruous items, a digital alarm clock, a modern law laptop, things that looked wildly out of place in this rustic setting, and everywhere covering every surface were mirrors. Mirrors of all shapes and sizes, from tiny hand mirrors to full-length ones leaning against the walls. They reflected the room back at me from every angle, creating a dizzying kaleidoscopic effect. Sit, the old woman said, ushering me to a rickety chair. I'll make us some tea, as she busied herself at an old wood stove. I tried to gather my thoughts. Something about this place, about her, felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was causing my unease. She returned with 2 steaming mugs, handing one to me. The liquid inside was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen on the surface. It smelled strange, not like any tea I'd ever encountered. Drink up, she said. Her pale eyes boring into mine twice. It'll warm you right up. I raised the mug to my lips, more out of politeness than any desire to actually drink the concoction. But as the liquid touched my tongue, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room began to spin, the reflections in the mirrors blurring and swirling. What did you give me? I slurred. Struggling to stand, my legs felt like lead, and the edges of my vision were growing dark. The old woman's face swam before me, her features shifting and changing one moment. She was ancient the next, young and beautiful, then something not human at all. Just a little something to help you sleep. My dear, she said, her voice echoing strangely, you'll need your rest for what's to come. I tried to fight the encroaching darkness, but it was a losing battle. The last thing I saw before consciousness took me was my own reflection in one of the mirrors, but it wasn't me. Not really. The face looking back was older, gaunt, with eyes that held a lifetime of terror. I woke with a start, my head pounding for a moment. I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then it all came flooding back. The hike, getting lost, the strange cabin, the old woman, the tea. I sat up, realizing I was on a narrow cot in a corner of the cabin. Sunlight streamed through the window's dust. Moe's dancing in the beams, the old woman was nowhere to be seen. I stood on shaky legs, my body feeling oddly stiff, as if I'd slept for far longer than one night. I made my way to the door, desperate to leave this place and find my way back to civilization. But when I stepped outside, my heart nearly stopped. The forest was wrong. The trees were taller, older, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. The very air felt different, heavier, somehow charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I spun around, intending to grab my backpack and run, only to freeze in shock. The cabin was gone. In its place stood a circle of standing stones, ancient and weathered, covered in strange symbols that seemed to ride and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. No, I whispered, backing away. This isn't possible. Oh, but it is, came a familiar, raspy voice. The old woman stepped out from behind one of the stones, but she wasn't old anymore. She was ageless. Her form shifting and changing as I watched, never settling on one appearance for more than a moment. What have you done to me? I demanded, my voice shaking. Where am I? She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. You're exactly where you were before. My dear, just a little further along. I don't understand, I said, panic rising in my throat. Time is a funny thing, she said, circling me slowly, so rigid for most, but so very fluid for some. You've taken a little trip that's all about, 50 years or so into the future. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. That's impossible. You're insane. I need to leave to get home. Her eyes flashed suddenly cold and hard. Home, oh my sweet summer child. This is your home now. Just as it has been for the past 5 decades. As she spoke, memories began to flood my mind. Memories of years spent in that cabin, of countless hikers lured in, of rituals performed in this very stone circle. Memories of learning secrets. No human was meant to know of extending my own life. At the cost of others, I saw my reflection in a pool of water at my feet, and a strangled cry escaped my lips. The face. Looking back at me was my own, but aged, worn, with eyes that held the weight of unspeakable things. "No," I whispered, falling to my knees. "This can't be real. I'm not you. I would never ever." But even as I denied it, I knew it was true. Somehow, impossibly, I had become the very thing that had trapped me. I was the old woman in the cabin, luring in lost hikers, perpetuating a cycle that had no end. "Don't fight it." My older self said, her voice almost gentle. "Now it gets easier in time, and we have all the time in the world." As the sun set over the twisted forest, I felt the last vestiges of my old self slipping away. The circle of stones hummed with power, and I knew that soon another lost hiker would stumble upon a cabin in the woods seeking help from a strange old woman, and the cycle would begin anew. In that moment, standing in a future I never wanted, I realized the true horror of my situation. I wasn't just lost in the woods, I was lost in time, trapped in an endless loop of my own making. And as the stars came out ancient and uncaring, I understood that my hike had ended long ago. This was my trail, now winding endlessly through the dark woods of eternity. The neon sign of the gas station flickered weakly in the midnight gloom, a lone beacon on the desolate stretch of highway. I pulled my beat-up Chevy into the lot, the engine sputtering ominously. The fuel gauge had been hovering on empty for the last 10 miles, and I silently thanked whatever deity was listening that I'd made it this far. As I stepped out of the car, a gust of wind whipped across the empty parking lot, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I shivered. Though not entirely from the cold, the station looked like it had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls and half the lights in the convenience store were out, but beggars can't be choosers. And right now I was definitely begging. I needed gas, and I needed it. Now I approached the pump, credit card in hand, when I noticed the faded sign taped to it. "Cash only, great, just great," with a sigh. I turned towards the store. As I reached for the door handle, I caught my reflection in the grimy glass. I looked as rough as I felt. 3 days of stubble, dark circles under my eyes, clothes rumpled from too many hours on the road. This cross-country trip was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave behind the mess my life had become. But standing here in the middle of nowhere, I felt more lost than ever. The bell above the door jangled discordantly. As I entered, the interior was dimly lit and smelled of stale cigarettes, and something vaguely metallic. Behind the counter stood an old man, his face deeply lined, his eyes hidden behind thick glasses that reflected the flickering fluorescent lights. "Evening," I said. Approaching the counter, "Fill up on pump 3, please." The old man didn't respond, didn't even look at me. He just stood there staring at something behind me. I turned half expecting to see another customer, but the store was empty. Excuse me?" I tried again. "I need to pay for some gas." Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible. The old man's head turned towards me, his glasses slipped down his nose, and I found myself looking into eyes that were completely white. No iris, no pupil, just a milky blankness that sent a chill down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice a dry whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once, "It's not safe, they're coming." I took an involuntary step back. "What, who's coming? Look, I just need some gas and I'll be on my way." The old man's hand shot out, gnarled fingers grasping my wrist with surprising strength. "Listen," he hissed. "You need to leave now before it's too late." A loud bang from outside made us both jump. I spun around to see a group of people emerging from the darkness, approaching the store with slow, deliberate steps. There was something off about their movements, something not quite human. "Oh, God," the old man moaned. "They're here, we're too late." My heart was pounding now, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Who are they? What's going on?" but the old man was already moving faster than I would have thought possible for someone his age. He shoved me towards a door marked employees. Only go, he said, through there out the back. Run, don't stop. Don't look back, just run. I hesitated for a split second, torn between fear and confusion, but another bang, louder this time, made the decision for me. I bolted through the door, finding myself in a narrow hallway that led to a back exit, and as I burst out into the night air, I heard glass shattering behind me. Screams, inhuman, terrifying screams, filled the air. I ran, my lungs burning, my legs pumping furiously. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. The landscape blurred around me, trees and rocks mere shadows in the darkness. Finally, my body gave out and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air as I lay there trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had happened. I became aware of a sound, a low pulsing hum that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. I sat up looking around wildly. That's when I saw them, lights in the sky moving in impossible patterns. They were too fast, too agile to be any aircraft I'd ever seen, as I watched, paralyzed with a mixture of awe and terror. One of the lights detached from the group and began to descend. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run again, but found I couldn't move. Some unseen force held me in place as the light grew closer, brighter, until it was all I could see, and then darkness. I woke up on the side of the highway, the sun beating down on my face. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure of where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back: the gas station, the old man, the chase, the lights. I sat up, wincing at the stiffness in my muscles. My clothes were torn and dirty, as if I'd been running through the woods. But that was impossible. The gas station had been in the middle of a barren stretch of highway, nowhere near any forest. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. In the distance, I could see a familiar sign, the gas station. My heart began to race as I approached it, unsure of what I'd find, but the station looked normal. Fresh paint, all lights working, a few cars at the pumps, nothing like the rundown place I remembered from the night before. Confused and more than a little freaked out, I entered the store. Behind the counter stood a young woman who smiled brightly as I approached. "Good morning, morning. What can I get for you today?" I stared at her, then at the spotless interior of the store. I was here last night. There was an old man. Something happened. The woman's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, but that's not possible. I worked the night shift last night, and I can assure you nothing unusual happened. Are you feeling all right? Would you like me to call someone for you?" I shook my head, backing away. No, I'm fine. Sorry to bother you." I practically ran back to my car, my mind reeling. Had it all been a dream? Some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but it had felt so real. As I slid into the driver's seat, something caught my eye. There on the passenger seat was a small metallic object I'd never seen before. It was about the size of a corn coin, covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and change. As I looked at them with trembling hands, I picked it up. It was warm to the touch, and I could feel a faint vibration emanating from it. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that last night had been real. Whatever had happened, whatever I'd encountered, it wasn't over. I started the car, my decision made. I couldn't go back to my old life. Not now. I had to find answers. What were those lights? Who were those people chasing me? And most importantly, what had really happened at that gas station? As I pulled onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw the old man from the gas station. His blank white eyes staring directly at me, but when I blinked, he was gone. I pressed down on the accelerator, the landscape blurring around me. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I knew I had to follow it because somewhere out there were answers, and I was determined to find them. No matter the cost. The strange object pulsed warmly in my pocket, a constant reminder that the world was far more mysterious and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. And as the miles ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The truth was out there waiting to be discovered, and I was going to find it one lonely highway at a time. For